Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the ISO, I'd like to welcome you to today's Extended Day-Ahead Market Implementation meeting. My name is Christina Guimera, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Just a few friendly reminders before we get started here. Today's call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. Please remember to keep your comments professional and respectful today, and we welcome and look forward to your engagement and participation during today's meeting. As you may have noticed, there are some new features on the WebEx this afternoon. The raise hand icon is now directly at the bottom of your screen. If you joined audio only, please press *3 on your device. There's also a new Inteller Transparency Viewer at the bottom right to see other attendees on the call, so be sure to refresh it prior to viewing. And closed captioning is also now available by clicking the CC button on the bottom left of your screen. Please remember to state your name and affiliation first before making any comments. And you can also send your comments and questions via chat to all panelists or to myself directly. And if you need any technical assistance during the meeting today, please send a chat to event producer Inteller Event. For today's agenda, James Lynn will be getting us started with a workshop overview. Then George Angelides will discuss inertia participation in extended day-ahead market and Western energy imbalance market. We will then take time for our first Q&A, and if time allows, we'll take a short break afterwards. Then James Lynn will discuss congestion revenue rights model and its settlement. Then we'll take some time for our second Q&A portion before we wrap up for the day and discuss next steps. So with that, I will turn things over to James Lynn to get us started.
Good afternoon, everybody. Just want to let everybody know that I am in a room, and for some reason the camera is not working correctly. We'll work on that later. Within the room and joining me is Heather Kelly, you got Yuvan, we have Abdul, say your last name please.
Mohammed Ali.
Partha, and then we have Khaled. And so I will kick off with the next slide. It's a quick overview of what we're going to discuss today. So the purpose of this workshop is to provide some additional details on these three particular topics. The first topic is going to be intertie participation in EDAM and WEM. This will be presented by George Angelides. He will be addressing how network location for intertie schedules and the impact it has on LNP, and touch very briefly on CRRs. I will talk more about the implication on CRRs later on. In addition, George is going to talk about modeling of transfer system resources and then overall intertie participation. After his presentation, we'll have a short Q&A and then a break, and then I will dive into the alignment between the CRR model as well as the CR settlement. In the CR model, we're going to address the phased-in alignment, and this is going to address the first part of the year for 2026, EDAM activation, and then afterwards, additional alignment when we come to the overall CR modeling enhancement and the CR release process. The second element I'm going to talk about will be the settlement alignment. This will be aligning CR Track 1B calculation with the CR modeling enhancements, align CR 1B calculation with EDAM participation, discuss CR settlement of ISO BA congestion revenue, including payments to CRs on all constraints. However, we will go into further detail how this alignment is going to address the fact that we are not receiving congestion revenue on specific constraints, and therefore we will not have a full CR settlement on that constraint. In other words, we'll have a full haircut. And afterwards, the last part is I will address we'll touch on future congestion revenue allocation designs and where we're going to have additional discussions on that. And if we are ready to proceed, George, I'm going to turn it over to you.
James, and good afternoon, everyone. My camera is working, but we're going to have it off to save that it's a scarce commodity at the location. So go to slide. All right, so this is an overview of what we're going to cover in this section of the workshop. As mentioned, we're going to focus on the network location for intertie schedules, how it's changing from the current day-ahead market with implementation of EDAM and the impact of that on locational marginal prices and congestion revenue rights. Briefly on that last part, because James is going to cover more details. We will be using or referring to transfers in the discussions. So we're going to have a view of how transfer model done, and transfers we have, and how they're used. And then we'll go into the focus of the presentation, where we'll discuss intertie participation and also how resource adequacy obligation is met specifically for the ISO Balancing Authority area. We'll go through 4 specific scenarios, whether the resource is in an EDAM BAA that participates, or whether it's an AIM BAA, or in a non-EIM BAA. And finally, we'll cover the case of an unknown source or sink for participation in. Next slide, please. At the end, we'll also have a Q&A. Thank you. So talking about network for intertie schedules in the current day-ahead market, which only involves the ISO Balancing Authority area, intertie schedules are modeled as algebraic injections at what we call the intertie scheduling point. Algebraic injection means it's positive injection for import and negative injection for export. And the intertie scheduling point is really a pricing location at that intertie. So with the deployment of EDAM, the intertie schedules will be modeled also as algebraic injections, but at what we call generation aggregation points or gaps. And there will be specific gaps for balancing authority areas that are the source or the sink of the energy for the import or the export. This is described in the EDAM tariff Appendix C and in the transmission as well. And the reason we're doing this change with EDAM, there are several compelling reasons. The primary reason is we want to have more accuracy in the power flow calculations and the market solution, because in the current market at the intertie scheduling point, which we mentioned is the pricing location at that intertie, there is no resource actually at that location. So modeling the energy for the import or the export at that location is inaccurate. There is no energy that is magically generated or consumed at that intertie location. So with EDAM, we're moving that location somewhere where it's more reasonably represented as being generated or consumed, and that will be the generation aggregation point for the specific BAA that is either the source of the import or the sink for the export. And of course, accurate market solution and accurate power flow translates to accurate congestion management and also accurate locational marginal prices. So they all go together. And then as additional benefits of this change, we also have better alignment with actual power flows that are happening in real time. So we'll have a reduction of phantom congestion that could be caused by these artifacts of modeling the import or the export as injections as fixtures. Well, in the model, they're injections at that location where there's actually no resource. There is also another benefit that in real time, operators will have reduced need for conforming transmission limits because there will be more alignment of what the market shows as the power flow in the solution and what the actual power flow is showing in the state estimator. And as a final step, this is an alignment of EDAM with what is already used in EIM today. For EIM BAAs, imports and exports are already using those generation aggregation points, so we'll have a consistent way of modeling imports and exports in both EDAM and WAME with that change. So let's go to the next slide and describe the generation aggregation points, what they are. So essentially a GAP is a trading hub for a specific balancing authority area, and it's composed of supply resources in that balancing authority area, and it has a set of generation distribution factors that essentially tell the model how the injection, whether it's positive or negative, is distributed to the various supply resources that are part of that GAP definition. And we have several different types of GAPs. We have the default generation aggregation point, or DGAP, and that is used for default non-resource specific intertie participation. All right, so all the supply resources are included in that GAP, in that BAA. We also support custom generation aggregation points, CGAPs. These are used or are intended to be used for resource-specific intertie participation. An example is the TIGENs, when the participant really knows exactly where the energy is coming from. It could be a single resource or a portfolio of resources. So it includes only specific suppliers in the BAA, not all of them. And finally, we also have the concept of the generic generation aggregation point, or GCAP. And some technical documents in the business requirements specification, we may be referring this to as a super GAP. We'll be using the term generic GAP here, which is used also in the tariff. And this is used for non-resource specific intertie participation when the source or sink BAA is unknown at the time frame of the day-ahead market. We introduced this element to essentially support those WSPPC contracts where at the time frame of the day-ahead market, the source or sink BAA is not known. So this generic GAP is really an amalgamation of many non-EDAM BAAs. So it includes all supply resources in a group of non-EDAM BAAs. So it's the collection of all the DGAPs of specific BAAs. We split this into two for now. We have a north generic GAP, which is associated with interties of northern EDAM BAAs, and a south GGAP associated with the southern EDAM BAA interties. So as EDAM BAAs join, those are going to be redefined dynamically. So now that we know what the gaps are, we can proceed to the next slide. Thank you. So this slide describes the change in intertie participation from the current day-ahead market with EDAM. So on the left, we have the current day-ahead market, and on the right, how this will be transitioning into the EDAM implementation. So as an example, and only as an example, I pick up here the intertie Malin 500, that's COI. In the current day-ahead market, the scheduling point that is used in association with this intertie, and we have a one-to-one association of scheduling points to interties in the current day-ahead market. So the scheduling point is this pricing node called Malin 5 and 101 is really a bus at the other side of the intertie in COI, whereas we have an example here for EDAM. We will be using in this example the default generation aggregation point of BPA. So as you can see in the diagrams below, in the current day-ahead market, the import is shown as being injected at the pricing node in Malin 5 and 101. And as we mentioned, there is no resource, physical resource really there. Essentially, the model sees this magically injected in that bus. Whereas in ADAM, we're actually distributing that import as it clears the market to the supply resources in the BPA balancing authority area. That's the dig up for BPA. So it's a better representation from a power flow perspective, and of course from a market perspective, where the energy is actually generated and its effects on the grid. Now let's talk about prices. So in the current day-ahead market, we're using the SPTI price to price imports and exports at Malin 5 and 101. Whereas in EDAM, we'll be using what we call the GAP-TI price. So in this case, the GAP is going to be the BPA D-GAP. Now, technically, the GAP is also a scheduling point, right? We have schedules there. But for the purpose of this discussion here, to be able to distinguish with the status quo, I will be calling those GAP ties versus the existing SP ties. Let's do a dissection on the LMP that will be used to settle inter-tie schedules. Both the SP tie and the GAP tie, they have the ISO marginal energy cost as a common component. So that's both in the same in both prices because these are imports, exports to the ISO balancing authority area. So you see those contribute or participate in the ISO balancing authority area. So you'll see the ISO marginal energy cost in both prices. Let's go to the next LMP component, which is the marginal loss cost. Not the next slide, I'm sorry. I confused you. Yes, thank you. It's the next bullet, really. So I have it in red because the marginal loss cost is an attribute of the scheduling point. So in the current day-ahead market, that's specific for the Malin 5 and 101 pricing node, whereas in EDAM, it will be the marginal loss cost of the BPAT dig-up. These are different because the sensitivity of losses changes by location on the grid. Now, of course, you may have multiple dig-ups here. I picked up BPA as an example, but you can go further out. Any non-EDAM BAA can be used as a source for this import. It could be Idaho, Puget Sound, or even BC Hydro. So you may be thinking here, wait a moment, we're moving the location from Malin 5 and 101 further out there in the full network model. Do we have an increase in marginal losses? What happens with all the intervening network, which may not be in the market, but it's still in the full network model? So in reality, we do not have additional marginal losses coming into the picture, because in the calculation of the loss sensitivity that leads to the marginal loss cost of the LMP, we do not include contributions from marginal losses in the external network outside of the market. So it doesn't matter how far you can go out to use a dig-up. It doesn't change the fact that it's only the losses in the market footprint that matter, the marginal losses, I mean. And also we have introduced a few years ago a feature in the calculation of loss penalty factors that are used in the marginal loss cost that is not very well known, but it has the effect of using the BAA for which you're calculating, for which your resource contributes to the power balance constraint as the reference. So in this case, even if you have other EDAM BAAs joining, those marginal loss costs, there will be marginal loss contributions from the ISO control grid on this particular example, so you won't see much of a difference. There will be a difference nonetheless because, of course, the sensitivity of the injection at Malin 5 and 101 will be different than the sensitivity, the loss sensitivity of injecting it at the aggregate location of the dig-up. But you're expecting small difference. Let's go to the next component, not the next slide, I'm sorry. the next LNP component. Thank you. Sorry, I'm not going to do this to you again. That is the marginal congestion component of the LNP, and this has multiple contributions. The most important contribution is what I saw in black, is the intertie scheduling limit. And the Malin 500 is an intertie scheduling limit, and ISL, other interties may have one or more ITCs, intertie scheduling limits. So that is an attribute of the tie. And both the SP tie and the GAP tie are using the same tie here, the Malin 500. So that's exactly the same. So whether you're using the SP tie today or the GAP tie tomorrow, this very important component of the marginal congestion component of the LNP is the same. All right, that's important for hedging against it using CRRs. Now, there are other components too, which are contributions from physical constraints, power flow constraints. That is different. These contributions are different in the SP tie versus the GAP tie because the Malin 5N101 location has different shift factors to binding constraints than the BPA DGAP, obviously. Now, how different? It really depends. Depends what GAP you're using and what constraint is binding. So we cannot tell you out of the blue here whether it's going to be bigger or smaller, but we will, we're investigating internally how we can provide relevant information to help you evaluate these changes on the impact of that portion of the marginal congestion component of the LNP for imports or exports. And we'll see how we can make some relevant information available to you. On this particular example, of course, there is also the fourth component of the LNP, the greenhouse gas marginal cost, the MGC, because this intertie, Malin 500, happens also to be an intertie to the California greenhouse gas area. Again, this component is the same, both in the SP tie and in the GAP tie. So now you know what's changing going from the SP tie to the GAP tie when it comes to the components of the LNP, which is relevant to our discussion on the next slide. Let's have the next slide, please. All right, so what's the impact? We did mention that there are some differences in the LNP. They're coming small difference from the marginal congestion of losses. And as we said earlier, we don't have contributions from outside the market footprint. It's only for inside the market footprint. And with the change that I mentioned earlier, it's only for the BAA, specifically you're calculating this import or export. And when it comes to the marginal congestion components, it's the small difference, depending, it's difference because of the change in effectiveness on the power flow constraints going from the SP tie to the GAP tie. There are some interesting elements here that the GAP ties bring into the picture. For example, today on an intertie, because there's a single scheduling point for that intertie, you only have one SP tie price that is used to settle all intertie schedules on that intertie. When we go to the GAP tie, there may be different prices because they all depend on the different gaps. So one GAP tie is different than another GAP tie in general. So you may have multiple prices that are used for settling intertie schedules at the same intertie, depending on which gap is used to source or sync it, right? Another interesting element is if the intertie scheduling limit is not binding on, let's say, some ties, then from the same gap to any of these ties, you see exactly the same price, because the only element that the intertie brings to the price is the intertie scheduling limit if it's binding. So if it's not binding, you can have the same price from all gaps to all these ties that they don't have ITCs binding. So if Malin 500, the ISL, is not binding, if PV West is not binding, then for a specific gap, let's say from Idaho going to Malin or Idaho going to PV West, the price is the same, okay? Let's talk about the impact on congestion revenue rights. As you know, congestion revenue rights provide a hedge for binding constraints on the ISO control grid, just like today. This will not change with EDEM. There are some implementation changes for CRRs to align them through 2 phases with what is going to happen in EDEM, specifically for those intertie modeling. And in phase 1, which will be in May 2026 to capture the monthly CRRs for May 2026. For that phase, the CRR system will not have support for gap ties, so we'll have a slight misalignment in the heads that the CRRs provide versus the IFM congestion cost from imports and exports. CRRs will provide the heads for import-export from to the SP tie, because that's what's going to be used in the CRR system, like today. But the IFM congestion cost will be using the gap tie. So the congestion cost for import-export, we will be using the gap tie LMP with all the differences that we mentioned earlier. Of course, if the major objective for obtaining a hedge for an import or export is to hedge for the intertie scheduling limit, then that misalignment is not there for you, because the CRR will give you exactly the same hedge for the IFM congestion cost, because SP tie and gap tie, they have exactly the same contribution from the intertie scheduling limit. So for the short time of phase 1 duration until we go to phase 2, which is targeting implementation for July 2026, subject to our vendor feedback, there will be some slight misalignment between the CRRs and the IFM congestion cost. But when phase 2 rolls over, where we try to catch it for the annual CRR auction for 2027, the work starts in July 2026, that phase will have a full support for all the gap ties that the IFM will have. So at that point, we'll have a full alignment of the CRR heads and the IFM congestion cost, because everything is going to be import-export from to the gap tie. Let's go to the next slide, please. All right, we'll do a brief review of the transfers, how we model, what types of transfers we support in the EDEM, because we'll be using those in the next of this section in the workshop. So how we model transfers? We model them as a pair, a matching pair of export and import energy schedules or capacity awards, because we also have capacity transfers in EDEM, at a pair of transfer system resources. So these are special system resources, transfer system resources that are used for modeling the transfer. And we have a pair for each direction at the transfer location, which is an intertie between 2 BAAs, as the graph shows here. It's an export transfer matched with an import transfer. Export from one BAA and import to the other. Now, our system supports multiple of those in each direction, because we have multiple types of transfers. So you can have any number of transfers in each direction, different TSRs. Let's go to the next slide. From a system perspective, the TSR is just like any other resource. So it has a set of attributes. Most of them are defined in the master file, like any other system resource. There are some exceptions I'll mention in the next slide, but we stay here for now. So of course there is the CID who is the ESC who can schedule the transfer is an attribute, and also the transfer location gives us information about where the transfer is. So it has from BAA to BAA, intertie, and direction. We support 4 different transfers, so there are 4 TSR types. We'll talk about them next. The tag flag, which will be yes only for one of the 2 matching TSRs, points out the direction which BAA has ultimate control of submitting the tag and perhaps changing the schedule in real time through real-time schedule interface. And of course, we'll have to have an attribute that says which is the matching TSR, that's the matching resource ID, There's a maximum capacity that says how much the maximum of the transfer capacity associated with this specific TSR. Then we have a flag for RSC eligibility. We'll talk about it next. Some transfers can be considered in the resource efficiency evaluation and some are not. We have a contract reference number for the transfers that are used for exercise or release capacity under a transmission right by a transmission customer. Some of these are having self-schedules, some of them they have capacity release. There is also capacity awards that they can have, ancillary service self-provision specifically, and also, I didn't list it here, but you can also have imbalance reserve and reliability capacity up and down as awards for an optimized transfer. Let's go to the next slide and see how all of this comes together. So these are the different TSR types that we have. 1 and 2 are used in association with transmission rights, and that's why you see there is a CRN. 3 and 4, they don't have a CRN. That's a contract reference number that uniquely identifies the transmission right. 1, the type 1 is used to exercise the right. So a transmission customer, a TCSC, can submit a self-schedule to exercise the rights, physical and also financial in settlements. Type 2 is for releasing capacity under a transmission right under pathway 2. And type 3 and 4 are used by the EDAM entity. It's the EDAM entity SC that releases transmission capacity for optimal use in the market. The difference between those two is type 3 is RSC eligible, type 4 is not RSC eligible, similar for type 1 and type 2. Type 1 is RSC eligible, type 2 is not RSC eligible, so these affect the evaluation for resource efficiency. Type 1 has a self-schedule. 2, 3, and 4, they have released capacity, how much capacity is released to the market. Additionally, type 3 may have a slow service of provision to support any on-demand obligations or reserve groups for EDAM BAAs. So that's about the TSRs. Let's go to the next slide. All right, now we'll walk through different scenarios for intertype participation. The first scenario that we see here is for participation from resources in an EDAM BAA. So resources in an EDAM BAA, in both EDAM and WAVE, because the participating resources by virtue of being part of an EDAM BAA, they bid at the physical resource location, that generator you see in EDAM BAA-J, and they participate via a transfer, an EDAM transfer. So the transfers that we saw in the previous slide. If there is a transmission right, they can exercise rights, the participant can exercise its rights with a TSR type 1, they can self-schedule the resource and the TSRs. Or they can bid economically and use any TSR type 2, 4 in EDAM and a static or a dynamic ETSR in the Western Energy Imbalance Market. The static ETSR is something that is optimized on a 15-minute basis in FMM, whereas a dynamic ETSR is also optimized in RTD on a 5-minute basis. So basically participation for EDAM resources is through transfers. If the EDAM BAAK is the ISO balancing authority area, and we want to describe how the array obligation from an EDAM resource is met, then you can use an RSC eligible transfer, either type 1, which is a self-schedule, or type 3, which is optimized capacity in EDAM, or a dynamic ETSR in the WAVE, and then tag the transfer showing the physical array resource, that generator in the EDAM BAA-J, to fulfill your array obligation. When you do your array showing, we do not require the physical resource in the picture. You can specify the import transfer at the ISO.it. You see there in blue. Blue is what happens in EDA. Red is what happens in the WAME. So you can use the TSR on the ISO side, the import TSR, to have the array obligation. So you do your array showing on that. This is associated with the intertie. Sierra is our system for array. It checks to make sure that the participant has the MIC. And then in day ahead, by 9, you have to declare that you will provide the array obligation from one or more resources that have to be defined in Sierra. We have to know them, but then you have the ability to change the participation even hourly as long as you specify by 9 a.m. So essentially that transfers the array obligation from the TSR to the physical resource. And that's where the physical resource has to bid or self-schedule to meet its array obligation. And then you use again a TSR type 1 or 3, type 1 for self-schedule, type 3 for economic. In the WAME, you use the ETSR, as we mentioned earlier. In both cases, you tag the transfer showing the physical array resource to fulfill your array obligation. So this is for intertype participation for EDEM resources. Let's go to the next slide. So if the resource is in an EIM BAA, okay, so in EDEM, you can actually have a bid intertie resource and use the EIM BAA DIGUP, as we mentioned. That's the blue resource you see there. It's an import. All right, and we model it in EDEM as the schedule being distributed on the EIM BAA DIGUP. In the WAME, what happens is whatever day-ahead schedule is cleared on that import resource, we mirror it in the EIM BAA. That's the export mirror resource you see here. That matches the day-ahead schedule for the import. And this is keeping the EIM BAA in balance because that generator, the physical generator, which is the source of the energy, will base schedule the same energy that cleared in the day-ahead market at the import system resource. So now EIM BAA is balanced because we have the base schedule of the generator and an export through that export mirror for the EIM BAA that matches the import into the EIM BAA-K. Everything is balanced. So participation in the real-time market is by submitting a bid at the physical resource. Okay, you participate now either with a base schedule to meet the day ahead, but if you want additional participation, you can also submit an energy bid, and you can participate economically via transfer in the WAME. That's the bottom part where you can see the WAME transfer. This can be static or dynamic, okay? What happens with the array obligation? Again, you use the import system resource in the array showing to show your array. This is associated with the intertie. Sierra will check, make sure that you have the MIC for that resource. All right. And then in real time, now you have to, again, transfer your array obligation from that system resource to the actual physical resource, where you can submit a base schedule and or energy bid and participate to meet your array obligation. And you have to tag the transfer, the ETSR that we show here at the bottom, showing the array resource. We're talking about one resource here in the example, but it can be also a portfolio of resources. You can specify that in Sierra by T-90. So that's how it plays out if the resource or the array obligation is in an EIM resource in an EIM BAA. Let's go to the next scenario. This is the scenario that covers participation from a non-EIM BAA. And this is a simple scenario because it's the same in both EDAM and the WAME. You bid at an intertie resource that is sourced or synced at the non-EIM BAA DIGUP. Okay, that's the blue resource, and it's the same resource that can be used in real time. You can have additional bid and everything. So obviously, if you have an array obligation from a non-EIM BAA, you're using these system resources. And there's no array obligation transfer. Stays the same throughout the markets and the array showing. It's all one system resource that does the job. Let's go to the next slide. So here we have intertie participation from an unknown source. So the participant here at the day-ahead time frame does not know which BAA is going to be, which non-EDAM BAA is going to be the source or the sink. So for that purpose, they can use the GAP, right? The non-EDAM generic GAP for that specific intertie. As we said earlier, each intertie will have one GAP that will be associated with it, and they can use a system resource registered for that GAP tie to bid. And the bid, whenever I say bid, if it is the ISO balancing authority area, you can have an economic bid. If it is a non-ISO EDAM area, it's normally a self-schedule, unless in the future the EDAM BAA allows intertie bidding. And of course, there is also the possibility to have economic bidding for a non-ISO EDAM BAA if it is a TG, it's a network resource. So there is the ability to have that as well, support for that. So that happens in EDAM, where you're using the system resource, the GAP, the GAP. Now, the GAP in real time doesn't exist because real time has to be all physical. So the accommodation for this generic GAP is only for the day-ahead market to, as I said earlier, accommodate WSPPC contracts, mainly the source of the energy or the sink of the energy is unknown at that time, but it has to be known in real time. So in real time, essentially, you have to replace the day-ahead schedule with one of the three scenarios that we mentioned earlier, depending on where the source of the energy is. If it is an EDAM BAA or a WAME BAA, where you use an ETSR transfer, or if it is a non-EIM BAA, in which case now you'll transfer to the specific system resource that is on that non-EIM DGAP, transferring from the GAP. Cyber is going to do this automatically for you for your day-ahead schedule at the GAP. It will be zeroed out. So you will have an imbalance deviation, of course, a Haas reversal for it, just like any other day-ahead schedule that cannot be tagged. So there is a certain potential exposure to imbalance deviation when you use the GAP, so you have to keep that in mind. When it comes to array obligation, you can still use the GAP if the source for the array energy is not known in the day ahead. So you can also use the GAP in your array showing or your monthly array showing. You can use the GAP in the day ahead. You just need, again, to transfer the array obligation from the GAP to another resource. It will be either a physical resource if it's in EDAM or EIM BAA. That's scenarios 1 and 2 we talked earlier. Or another system resource that is on a non-EIM BAA DGAP if that is the array source, okay? So 2 elements here. You see all these resources that I'm mentioning, import-export system resources, transfer system resources, mirror system resources. You may have a question, okay, what do I do? How do I set these resources to participate in EDAM? So for transfer system resources, in the onboarding process, when we bring an EDAM BAA into the picture, those are normally going to be defined at that time for all types. So there will be registered in the master file. There is also the possibility to define type 1 transfer system resources in Cyber temporarily just for the particular trading day. And for type 2, yes, they can be registered in the master file, but they can also be defined in Cyber through the process that we call auto matching, where Cyber will match type 2 capacity release across the intertie on either side and come up with TSR's type 2 matching participants. So there is a certain level of flexibility there. For other system resources, like the import-export system resources sourced or synced at DGUPS, the participant needs to register those in the master file through the same process that is used today. That's using the intertie resource template. And for mirror system resources, we are going to do that. The ISO is going to do that. The ISO system is going to define and register a mirror system resource for each EIM BAA and each intertie that they have with an EDAM BAA. And the mapping of the head schedule so that mirror system resource will be done automatically by our system, and Cyber will actually seed the base schedule for the mirror system resource to match the day-ahead schedules that are associated with it. And then the EIM BAA will have control over that base schedule through BSAP, but we'll just start it by matching the day-ahead schedule, and then it can be changed in BSAP. So that's about the resource registration. There's another element I want to discuss here with you. What we're showing you here today is the general case, vanilla case, if you wish, for intertie participation that our systems support. If the energy is willed through an EIM BAA, there may be additional implementation details because of specific TSP and transmission owner agreements in place. So we're not covering this in this workshop, but we intend to have a separate workshop focused specifically on the Northwest AC intertie, COI, on using rights through BPA for that. There are additional details that we want to discuss there. Several options we'll lay out of how you can participate and use those rights. So if you have questions on that specific element, please hold them for that workshop. We'll let you know when it's going to happen. All right. Let's go to my last slide. This table is really a synopsis of what we talked so far. You can use it as a reference card that tells you what EDAM and EIM supports in terms of intertie participation. The general rule is EDAM to EDAM is a transfer in the day ahead. You can have EDAM to EIM, you're using a system resource or an intertie transaction that you don't have to register the master file. We support that too. And it's mirrored in the EIM BAA in real time. Or you can have a system resource from a non-EIM BAA. And finally, we also support the GGUP. In real time, anything between EDAM and EIM has to be a transfer. Participation from non-EIM, again, you have a system resource with a non-EIM DGUP, and the GGUP is not supported in real time. You cannot use it for scheduling. You have to actually use the other scenarios that we talked about today. So thank you for being with me. It was a lot of information, and it may take a little bit to sync, but we'll have we'll open here for questions that you may have on this material. And again, I will kindly ask you to hold your questions if they're specific on COI. We'll have the time to go more in detail on that in another workshop.
George, our first question, we have a hand raised from Pushkar Wagle. Go ahead,
Yes.
Pushkar.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Pushkar Wagle from Field Resource Consultant on behalf of BAMX. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Hey, George. A great presentation as always. Pretty dense topic. If you could go to slide number 11. I do have a question on slide 11 and then on slide 19. Yeah. So here, does this mean that in May and June of 2026, let's say, the Malin CRRs won't be able to hedge the actual day ahead market, actual congestion exposure? Is that the issue that's going to be there for those couple of months?
The correct way to say it is that they will hedge a portion of it.
Right.
So, as I mentioned, there may be a certain misalignment between the FM cost from that intertie using the gap tie LMP and the CRR that's using the intertie SP. But as I mentioned, there are important components that are the same,
Right.
like the intertie scheduling limit. So that's the same. The difference, let's forget about the losses. It's very
Physical,
small.
maybe. Yeah.
The difference is really the physical congestion because of the 6-factor difference from the gap tie to the intertie scheduling point.
Hey, George,
Yeah.
why don't
And
we save this, any questions to CR until after my presentation, because I will touch on all this.
sounds good.
Yeah, certainly.
Let me just add one. Would this gap tie MCCs, wouldn't they be known at EDAM implementation in May?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Very good question. Thank you for asking it. I forgot to mention it, that all these gap ties, they're going to be defined in the master file ahead of time, and they will be published. There is a spreadsheet that we have in the technical session of our OASIS that contains all the information about all the scheduling points and all the interties. So we'll publish in advance all these gap ties so you would know which gap tie you need to use to register resources in the master file, or, as I mentioned, you don't have to register them. You can use intertie transactions inside where you specify the gap and the intertie.
Got it. Thank you for that. Because I was going to ask that if the gap tie MCCs are known at EDAM implementation, why can't the CRR settle at those gap tie MCCs?
That's because of the system work that we need to do. We don't have enough time to do this modeling for the CRR system by May of 2026. This is the reason. That's why we're doing a phased implementation. It was physically impossible to get that through and model all these gap tie combinations in the CRR system for May. So we're targeting July 2026 for that.
Got you. I think that explains. One quick question on no, before I go to slide 19, just a question on the non-EIM BA DG gap. Do you have the visibility? I mean, I was just wondering, do you have already the modeling in the master file and the network in terms of calculating that D gap for the non-EIM BA? Could you elaborate on that? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, very good question. Thank you for that too. I also forgot to mention how we calculate those generation distribution factors. Yes, so every BAA is in the West, of course, is in the full network model. So we have the full network model for either the non-EIM BAAs, and we do know their supply resources. So we have defined the non-EIM BAA dig gaps. We use them today in EIM actually, and the generation distribution factors for all these gaps, they're coming essentially from smoothing and adapting values from the state estimator. So they do reflect in long term, of course, reality of how the supply generation distributes in those VAAs.
Excellent. And then one quick question, if you could please go to slide number 19. And I was just wondering, let's consider the first row, the EDAM BA source, and then you have, syncing the transaction at EIMBA, non-EIMBA, and the unknown reference point. And there you have you're using the DGAP and non-EIMBA, DGAP and GGAP respectively. Why wouldn't you use some load aggregation points as the sink rather than this? Is there a challenge with using sort of load aggregation points and the data is not available? Just wondering on using the use of GGAP versus load aggregation points.
That's another excellent question, Pushkar. Yeah, why we use generation aggregation points and not load aggregation points? So the reason is that the load is pretty much fixed for non-EIM or non-EWS in the day-ahead market. It's really the demand forecast that we have for them, and that doesn't change. What changes is the generation. So when you start the market, you have generation to match the demand forecast, right? And then if you have import from that non-EIM BAA, let's say an example here, to an EWBAA, whatever clears the market, well, we distribute it as additional generation, all right, because you have to have now more generation than the load. If you have an export, then it's distributed as negative generation, so it reduces the generation level. It's absorbed by the generating resources. So it's really the generating resources that are the secondary control. The load stays fixed at the demand forecast. That's the reason.
Understood. Well, that helps a lot. Thanks, George. That's all I have. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for your questions. They were really illuminating. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question we have is from Kathleen Colbert from Vistra.
Yes.
How's it going? Oh, hi, George. Can you hear me? Kathleen from Vistra.
Yes, we can hear you, Kathleen.
Excellent. There's a little bit of a mute thing, so appreciate you confirming. Couple implementation questions. I appreciate Pushkar. One of my questions I think was related. I heard James, you mentioned to hold it. I'd like to pose my question and get confirmation if it's better in that part of the agenda versus now, if that's all right. So the question that I was going to pose was a May 2026 versus a July 2026 change to the CRR model. It's only a couple months. I didn't understand why there were two phases. I mean, especially given this is such a short time period. And I was looking for just some more context around the implementation challenge. So I'm happy if you want to put that one. So, yeah, thanks, George.
No, this is implementation, so I can answer this one. So we didn't have enough time to pull all the changes in the CRR system to support the monthly CRRs for May 2026 when EDAM goes live. And that's the only reason why we had to phase it and use the existing SPTI until we support fully the gap ties, right? So it was a lot of work for a CRR system to really make the May 2026. It was very risky. So that's why we phased it out, and now we're going to put all our efforts to have it for July 2026 to catch the annual CRR process for 2027. And again, I mean, this is also very dependent on the feedback that we'll have from our vendors, because, it depends on them as well.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I'm sure you're aware of this, but if there is anything that you can do with the vendors to try to accelerate that timeline so that it is aligned, that would have a very meaningful and important impact on the market. As you know, the deltas between the IFM, such as like fundamental difference between the models, can lead to a lot of adverse outcomes. So I just wanted to make a pitch publicly to see if you could do everything you can to try to accelerate that if possible.
Yes, of course. I mean, we're always trying, but, we do have the physical constraints of vendors, and maybe Heather Kelly can answer this question better than me, but, if we can pull something like a miracle like that together, yeah, of course we'll be happy to do it. But you know, we'll have to work on schedules that are feasible, because we don't want to go out and tell you, yes, we're going to have gap tie support for the CRR system in May 2026, and then come later and say, sorry, we cannot make it. Like it's difficult. We won't have the resources. We don't have the time to do it. So that's why you do a planning that is actually have a good chance of delivery, right?
So, yeah, so George, when I talk about it, when I get into the phase implementation or slides, I will talk more specifically on why we believe that at this time we won't be able to make the 2026, but we will always try and get it earlier if we can, but that's why we're targeting for July 2026. Has a lot to do with when you have offering of the CRRs for the running of the monthly process or annual process ahead of time. So we'll get more into that discussion later.
I really appreciate that, James. Really just offering this in the spirit of, I know sometimes it can help you, you and the team, to know what are the elements that have a big impact, just as you guys consider it. That's all. The second question I had was back on slide 11. I have, well, I guess two. One, I do have more than one question, and I'm being judicious with my questions out of respect for the meeting. So process question, is there going to be an opportunity to submit a list of, like, to submit more detailed questions to potentially get some answers? That would be really helpful if possible. And no need to commit now, but I'd like to make that ask.
Maybe I need to defer to somebody else here on this, if they can answer that question.
And Christina, if it's okay, I'm fine to defer it, but if I do think an opportunity for stakeholders, that was incredibly fast, and an opportunity for us to submit questions and then get them fielded would be a productive next step. So I just want to lob that out there for customer service and engagement to consider. Thank you. My substantive question is, I hadn't really fully, so George, I hadn't fully grasped that I knew that under the EDM proposal that intertie bidding was going to be supported for California ISO/BAA only. I had not fully grasped that we were moving away from our core intertie design. So as I've read through the slides and processed this before the call, my one question for you is that as I came to better understand that we're going to have multiple generator aggregation point to tie prices, so a many-to-one relationship, multiple prices for a single intertie point, dependent on where it's sourced from externally based on how you're modeling that gas tie relationship. It occurred to me that that could have some wonky incentives that it could introduce to the market space, where an entity might want to try to surface through participation what the most economic relationship is, and then decline the awards on the others. I'm hoping y'all have thought through that incentive, because I know you do in your private, back as you're working through implementation. And I was wondering if you could shed some light onto what controls or monitoring you've done. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the idea is that you're using a specific resource, either a system resource that is registered in the master file or an intertie transaction that specifies the gap and tie. The resource that is registered in the master file has the gap and tie as attributes. So that's where your schedule is, that's where you get the price, this is where you settled, and this is where you go tag this day ahead schedule. So the tag has to agree with the market schedule. If you want to change your participation in real time, and let's say use another gap, that means that you will have a deviation on your day schedule because you're buying that back in real time, and then you submit a new bid from a new gap, from another gap, I want to say, for participating in real time, but you have a settlement element there because you have to be buying back your day-ahead schedule and then having a real-time schedule. And this is not something that, you know, it's coming with a gap tie introduction. This can happen today. You can have a schedule at Marlene, buy it and bid somewhere else in real time. It's exactly the same outcome, right?
That's a different scenario than I was envisioning, and I was trying to be a little vague, but I'll be more specific because I am concerned, and I just want to make sure that CAISO and you are all thinking about it. I was thinking about a scenario in which an intertie trader submits intertie offers at, let's say that there are 3 potential gap tie pairs that could go to the same intertie but from 3 different gaps, and offer that, and then to see the market awards associated with that and identify the most economic of those. That's the one that they would, you know, want to maintain through real time, and then decline the tags on the other 2. And I don't think this is a necessary, and I don't want to ascribe a judgment. This is the scenario that occurred to me, and I would appreciate the CAISO to consider it.
Yeah, this is a great scenario, and that's why we have the Hasp reversal. James, maybe you should answer this.
Yeah, so we already account for this today, and what would apply is, depending upon when they decline the day-ahead resource, you have either the Hasp reversal calculation will occur, or you got intertie deviation penalty at the ISO balancing authority area. So the Hasp reversal applies to all BAs. The intertie deviation penalty applies to the ISO BA, but if you have someone that's trying to arbitrage with this, we do have penalty structures in place to address it. In addition, those resources or that SE can be referred to DMM if we see a truly manipulation of this.
Okay, great. Thank you guys very much for the explanation. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kathleen. And as always, if anyone has any questions that they'd like to address after the call, feel free to email isostakeholderaffairs@CAISO.com. Our next question in the queue is Jennifer Gerard. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Hi, this is Jennifer Gerard at Idaho Power. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Can you go to slide 16 for me? All right, thank you. So my question is kind of around the WEAM mirror. So my understanding is, yeah, that so the EDAM, so if you have a mirror between an EDAM BAA and an EIM BAA, the day-ahead schedule is going to be consumed by CAISO from the EDAM BAA. Then it will be mirrored onto an auto mirror on that mirror ETSR for the base schedule for the EIM BAA. And then the pre-hour schedule will be consumed by the EDAM BAA, and then the WEAM BAA could submit the ATF schedule. So I guess my question with this is, with the auto mirror concept, because so if it's auto mirroring the day ahead schedule to create the hourly base schedule, what happens with EIM BAAs who have kind of in their tariff kind of this timeline of T-57 to pull in an hourly schedule? So our transmission customers, we have it in our tariff that's required, that they have an hourly schedule that's consumed at T-57 and not this day ahead. I think I'm just kind of concerned of how the mechanics of that is going to work.
Sure. Yeah, so you're correct. There's an auto mirror that will be registered for that intertie, for that EIM BAA, to mirror all day-ahead schedules on that intertie. So the process will have Cyber facilitate this by seeding the base schedule for the mirror system resource after the closure of after the publication of the day-ahead market results. When the real-time market opens, let's say it's 1 p.m., right? So it will seed it and then surrender control of the base schedule to the EIM entity, because the EIM entity has control of the base schedules through BSAP, let's say through T-57 based on your OAT. So you can change the base schedule according to your needs. we're just facilitating the mirroring. So it's by default there. We match the day-ahead schedule so that we have a balanced system starting the real-time market, but you still maintain control as an EIM entity on all your base schedules, including the mirror system resource through VSUB.
Okay, so can I give an example and maybe just walk through it? So let's just say the day ahead schedule is 100 megawatts. And let's say the other EDMBA, maybe there's a system issue and for some reason they put in 0 just because they have, an upgrade or something happens. And then when we kind of come into our schedule, we'll have an hourly schedule of 100 megawatts because that's what our system consumes. And then that EDMBA continues on through the pre-hour into the real time, and they continue to have that system issue, let's say, and it's a 0 megawatt schedule. My understanding is there's a chance of kind of this neutrality that can be created because, when you have these differences between the EIM and the EDAM BAAs, is there going to be visibility to be able to kind of see and work with those EDAM BAAs to kind of determine what they submitted on those kind of pre-hour schedules, or just to try to have some sort of work to try to check out with those counterparts? Do you hear what I'm saying?
I think I get it. So the base schedule on the mirror is, base schedules are only used for the balancing test, right? Once you pass the balancing test, when we're on the market, the full use of the auto mirror function is in place. So if the day-ahead schedule is cut for some reason, I don't know, it's an outage or whatever, the mirror is automatically adjusted. So in the real-time market solution, everything is kept in balance. But for the EIM-BAA to pass the balancing test and relying on the base schedules, that's where you have full control of your base schedule for balance for the balancing test. When we're on the market, there shouldn't be any inconsistency in terms of megawatts, right? Now, for settlement for prices, I know there is an issue that maybe James is better equipped to answer it when you have a misalignment because base schedules are not settled. We only schedule base schedule deviations, whereas a deviation on the day-ahead schedule, the blue that you see here, is actually settled. So there might be some dollar inconsistency, and I'll call James to opine on that one and explain it. But megawatt-wise, the market is balanced.
So Jennifer, the issue that you are addressing is something that actually occurs today and that can propagate into other BAAs as they join EDAM. The issue is more in alignment with WEIM's tariff that any intertie tags that have been submitted prior to T57 will be incorporated in the base schedule. Now, if the tag has been updated between day ahead and that T57 deadline, and they update the tag itself, that's where you can have this neutrality issue. The example would be is I have a 100 megawatt schedule coming out of the day ahead. They update it at T65 to 125. The WEIM BAs are reflecting that 125 as a base schedule, but that 25 megawatt change for the EDAM BA or the ISO BA actually settles at the 15-minute price. And so that can create some neutrality issues because you are settling energy on one side of that intertie and not on the other. This is a known issue, which is why we believe that the auto mirroring function will help resolve some of that or majority of that, because at that point, the auto mirror would reflect the 100 megawatt schedule coming out of the day ahead. And then for both the WEIM BAA and the EDAM BAA, the FMM dispatch will reflect 125. And so you are then settling 25 megawatts both in the real-time market, and we eliminate neutrality issue.
Okay. Thanks, Jane. That's helpful. Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know that would take kind of a larger scale WEAM community, because I think obviously, as you know, most of us all have that T57 cutoff, and I think the idea of having to go through that process, I'm not sure, you know, what.
And we understand that. We just we've made it known that this is an issue and that this is where that neutrality imbalance comes from.
Okay.
We won't have necessarily any reports that is going to identify what that cost is, but this is embedded in the offset allocations.
Okay. Thank you.
And as I said, it has to stay with the ISO.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. No further questions.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Callie Wells. Go ahead, Callie.
ETF. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Actually, the conversations with Kathleen and Pushkar answered most of my more detailed questions, so I'll keep it brief. I have a couple just high-level questions to confirm my understanding. So at a high level, am I hearing it correctly that energy that is importing into an EDMBA at the same location could be priced differently depending on if they are sourced from a G gap, a D gap, or a custom gap, sorry.
Yeah, the gap brings in the components of the LMP that are attributes for that scheduling point, which is the marginal cost of losses and the component of the marginal congestion that is coming from power flow constraints.
Okay, so all three of those prices, even though they're associated with the same import location, could be different, and depending on how somebody submitted their bid or their schedule, identifying which source they're using, they're going to be settling at those different prices.
Yeah, so it's the same intertie, but it's not the same intertie location, and that's why we call it a gap tie. So the tie is the same, but if the gap is different, you really have different gap ties, so different LMPs. So that's why we combine it as a gap tie.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's what I wanted to confirm.
I just want to dive in a little bit. The marginal energy cost will be the same.
Yep, yeah.
Any ITC ISL congestion component would be the same. So the only real difference will be the marginal cost of losses and any power flow congestion based upon the shift factors, physical losses, based upon the shift factors from that D gap, G gap to the constraint.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you for that confirmation. My other question is, I don't think you touched on it, but it kind of goes back when you were going through the different TSR types, and this question's been bugging me, so I'm hoping you can answer it. So obviously when you have a bunch of transfers, the different TSR types between two EDM BAAs, you guys are setting a transfer limit between those two EDM BAAs in the market. Am I correct in assuming that how that transfer limit is being set is simply summing, and I know simple is probably not the right word, but summing up all the different TSR types that have been submitted between those two BAAs in that hour?
So each transfer has its own scheduling limit that reflects the rights that are associated with a transfer. So there is not one limit that is shared by many transfers. Each one has its own scheduling limit because it's particular to the rights that are associated with a transfer. If you have some constraint, some scheduling constraint that goes across transfers, that is a different constraint. This is an intertie scheduling limit that could constrain multiple transfers. Like, for example, at Malin 500, the Malin intertie scheduling limit constrains a lot of things, constrains all imports, exports through Malin 500 and all transfers through Malin 500, you know, transfers from Portland General and from Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, I guess I'm just a very, very simple examples. What I'm trying to wrap my mind around right now is if you just have a bunch of transfers being submitted between the same two BAAs and they all have submitted the different TSR types, what is in the actual market model? Is there one transfer limit? And if that binds, you're going to get price separation? Or is each TSR that's submitted a separate limit and you might have one bind and not the other? And then how does that affect prices?
That's a great question, Kari. So yes, each transfer, its TSR pair has its own scheduling limit, and it's possible that a scheduling limit is reached, all right, and you may have others or other parallel transfers that are not reached the scheduling limit. You don't have price separation until all transfers hit the scheduling limit, okay?
Okay. Okay, nope, that helps. I was just trying to figure out at what point in time do you actually get price separation between those BAAs, and it's when all the transfers hit their limits. Okay, thank you, George.
Correct, and Kelly, keep in mind that you may have multiple interties with their own transfers. So to have price separation, all the transfers across all interties between those BAAs have to hit their scheduling limit. So it's not only on one intertie, but all other interties that you have between those two BAAs. Because
Okay.
if there is anything loose, then, you know, even if they're binding, their saddle price is zero, because it doesn't cost anything. The constraint doesn't cost anything because there's another free route around it. So all of them have to be constrained to have price separation.
Okay, super helpful. Thank you, George.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Callie. Next in the queue, we have Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. Go ahead, Dan.
And James, this is Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. So first, I would just want to say thank you. It's been great this week to get into this level of discussion with the trainings and then this workshop. I do feel like, to follow up on Kathleen's comment about where we go from here, I do feel like we need some form of a formal comment period on this, but I guess that depends a little bit on what we're actually looking at here. If this presentation is sort of just an aggregation of some combination of BRS and BPM level details that are on their way to those individual processes that we'd have an opportunity to comment on there and get more information, you know, that would allow us to ask some specific detailed questions there, and then maybe just to follow up on this meeting, we could just have some more examples for that kind of higher level aggregate conversation. Am I reading that correctly, or how should we take sort of the information that we're being given today?
Well, it's an implementation workshop. We want to convey information about how the implementation will play out, what resources you will need to register ahead of time, how you can participate in the different scenarios that we, you know, pointed out. And we're going to have, as I mentioned, a more focused workshop on some more complicated scenarios that involve rights through EIM BAAs when there are agreements between TSPs and TSR and the transmission customers. So as an implementation workshop, of course, you know, comments are useful. But there's not really a debate in terms of, this is not a policy workshop, right? It's an implementation workshop. Christina mentioned that you can send comments, which of course we will read and know exactly how you feel about these implementation changes. Other than that, I don't know.
So
Dan, before you go, so Dan, this implementation workshop is giving a more overview of the BRS BRQs that we are implementing. And so as you're reviewing the BRS, if you have additional comments or questions related to each individual BRQ, then that would be a good place to provide those comments and questions. This is just basically, again, this is an overview of everything that's been outlined in the BRS and what we plan to implement.
got it. That's helpful, James, and I imagine some will also show up in BPMs. I have one or two just quick comments on it as well, but just to kind of close out the process side, being someone who's participated in this initiative since 2018, I was under the understanding from kind of the EDAM design and discussions during that EDAM implementation was primarily about the CAISO BA and its interaction with the EDAM BAs, but that CAISO's intertie market, other bilateral market activity in the West, and the EIM was not going to be fundamentally impacted in the way that is, to me, is being described here, as far as changing some of the way that prices and congestion are modeled and developed. And I think that there's a pretty large impact here that's to kind of the market in general and to contracting that is a lot for folks to absorb in one workshop, and to me is a policy level thing, because it was not signaled as a change that was going to happen back in the EDAM design process. But that's just my view. Others may have different views. I also, though, want to note that depending on how some of these things come together, it may be necessary to have some changes in either EIM entity tariffs or in EIM entity business practices, because the implication of the scenarios is that sort of all transmission in the West is participating in EIM, and all generation in the West is participating in EIM, and that's simply not the case. There's a large amount of transmission from BPA to the CAISO, from the desert southwest of the CAISO, that is held by entities that have resources located in an EIM BA, but are not participating resources, and that have transmission that is next to ETSRs that EIM entities have set up, but are not participating EIM transmission, and even the EIM entities themselves have not contributed all of their transmission rights, in some cases, depending on what methodology they're in, to participating in EIM. And so if the implication is that this policy sort of means that everything has to participate, that's another sort of major change that then would have to work through some tariff and business practice things outside. And if that's not the case, if you're still going to have non-participating transmission, non-participating generation, and they can continue to bilaterally interact with the CAISO at its interties and self-schedule into EDAM areas at their interties without being involved in EIM redispatch, then that'd be a good clarification.
Dan, I want to pull on a couple of your statements, and I want to make sure it's understood, is that in WEAM, we have the concept of participating resources and non-participating resources. We are not changing that concept or design. The non-participating resources can continue to self-base schedule, whereas participating resources will continue to do self-schedule and or economic bidding in the real-time market. Relationship from day ahead to WEAM is by bidding in a similar way as you do today at the ISO and the EDAM BAs, where for an EDAM BA you're self-scheduling. For ISO, you can provide economic bids. That tells us which BAA it's coming from. Now, that award can be backed by either a participating or non-participating resource. I just want to make sure that that's clear.
That's a good clarification. That wasn't clear from the scenarios, at least to me. So that's a good clarification. I think that there'll be some additional questions that come in with the timing, but I don't want to take up all the time with those. I think those can be submitted as just in the follow-up, either, as you said, BRS, BRQ, or in some other comments. So yeah, that was the stuff I just wanted to note. I think it'd be good to have a formal comment period just as people absorb this information, but that's up to you all. And I'll leave it there.
Okay, and if you have any specific settlement questions, you know you can provide them as questions to the BPMs, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Rohan Chatterjee from Pacific Corp.
Yeah. Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I'm looking at slides 16 and 17, and I think it was in one of these slides where George was explaining the concept of system resources. Just to make sure I understood the concept correctly, so system resources would apply at all EDAM externally intertie points. Is that accurate?
You can register a system resource at any EDAM BAA intertie with association of a non-EDAM BAA gap. Okay?
Okay, got it.
And again, you have the option not to register a resource, and using the intertie transaction, we specify the tie and the gap, and of course, Cyber will validate that this is a valid combination based on what I mentioned earlier. We're going to publish this gap ties so that you know which ones they are. The advantage, or I don't know, maybe the difference between an intertie transaction and a system resource, the system resource is registered in the master file, so it can actually have certification for providing capacity products like reliability capacity, right? Whereas the intertie transaction is only used for energy. And the system resource also can have array obligation, you know, elements that you need to have registered in the master file. Make sense?
Yeah, thank you. So if the system resource is not registered in the master file, it is not going to be eligible for RSC showings?
No, it has to be registered in the master file so that have a resource ID that is static declared in CRAS as our array system needs to know about it, so it needs to be a registered system resource that you will use for array sewing.
Okay. Thank you, George. That's helpful. And then associated question would be, again, it is on system resources, but it goes back to slide, I think it was slide 13, where you had shown the transfer system resource attributes. Is there a similar slide or a similar, some literature where you speak to system resource attributes, just like how you have explained TSR attributes here in this slide 13?
Yes. Well, these are already, I mean, we already have system resources in the system, so the intertie is a template written for the high attributes for those. I focus on TSRs because the new element that we're introducing with EDAM.
You're somewhat breaking up, George.
I'm sorry, let me repeat. And so what I was saying is that for system resources, we already have system resources registered in the master file, so their attributes are known today. I focus on TSRs because it's a new element that EDAM brings in. So that's why you see all these review item for the TSR attributes, because they're new. System resource attributes, you're using them today, so you'll see them in the intertie resource template that is used for registering them in the master file.
They're also defined when you're doing a transaction ID as how you're creating that resource. Transaction ID name, it tells you what attributes are applicable. The only difference is if you're at the ISO balancing authority area, instead of putting the ISO scheduling point as part of your injection, or you will actually put a DGAP instead. So it follows the same design principles you have today. It's just your scheduling point moves from the ISO scheduling point to a DGAP. The other thing I wanted to make sure we had clarification on is the RSC. You asked a question about RSC and intertie transactions at EDAM boundary, whether they account for RSC evaluation. All self-schedules at the intertie boundary will count for RSC evaluation for that BA.
Okay, and that includes the ones that are dynamically formed using transaction IDs?
Correct.
Okay, got it. All right, that's really helpful, George and James. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have a question from Chunyu Luo. Go ahead.
Yes. Hi, good afternoon. Thanks, George and James. My name is Chunyu from PG&E. I have a question on slide 9 or 10. Let me see. Yeah, on the 10. So when this concept introduced, I do have to say I'm very surprised to see this. And I would like to know that if you can provide, I believe probably Dan asked that, if you can provide example, kind of illustrate the settlements, especially when the source, like the example on the right after the EDAM, when the source is different, but it's in the same BPAT, in the same gap, to kind of illustrate the settlement differences?
Okay, we're using this today for EIM interties, like in the WIM. So the DGAP of non-EIM BAAs is used as the source for import into an EIM BAA. It's not really a new concept. We're moving into that concept so that we have full alignment between EDAM and WIM. It's not really new, right? So the impact of the DGAP, you can see today in the WIM.
And then can you just point me? Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. I say, as we go through market simulation and we have these resources, being implemented or submitted, the transaction IDs from the DGAP to like Malin tie, we potentially can look at what the implications are, but it will have to happen during market simulation because I do not have a pricing to do that comparison to today.
And okay, so during the market sim, you can, I mean, how will I know that CAISO doing the comparison and where, in what forum the example will be shared?
So if you are participating and you, say for one trade date, you put in the Malin scheduling point to the Malin intertie, and then the next trade date you're doing to a DGAP to the intertie, as the scheduling coordinator is performing both of those transactions, you can do a comparison. I can look at potentially picking a specific resource and put it through the settlement user group, but I do not have that slated as of today.
Okay, thank you. So potentially we'll be able to see one from the settlement user group. And I think another question, this just from our SME, I will just like ask. So we know that it's after EDAM, the other SP tie, it's going to be replaced by the gap, the D gap. And what about the Arizona intertie, like Palo Verde?
Same thing.
Yeah, this design is throughout all of the ISO boundaries. So if you're having energy coming in at Palo Verde and it's coming from PNM versus Arizona, you would choose the appropriate DGAP and have the intertie location being Palo Verde.
Okay, so actually it will be impacted. Thank you. All right, thank you for answering the question, James.
Thank you. And in the interest of time, James, George, do you think we should reserve the rest of the questions here for the next Q&A, or did you want to continue on at this time?
Do you have, how many hands have I?
We have 2 more hands up.
Oh, okay. I mean, let's go with these 2, and you know, if there are any more questions past those, we'll take them in the general session.
Okay, so we'll take 2 more questions. Next up is Jeff Fruit. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks, you guys. This has been informative. A little confusing, but informative. I appreciate you guys taking the time to present it. I'm sort of trying to put together stuff I've heard in this presentation, and I think a simple example would help me. So if today I have a registered import system resource at Malin, and today I can use that resource to support bilateral trade imports from really anybody in the Northwest through that. And I think that's what you guys are saying. That's sort of a problem for the power flow, and I can understand that. But in tomorrow's world, or when this goes into effect in May, that single system resource, would I be expected to register an import system resource for each DGAP that might source a bilateral for me? So could it be the 10 or 20 BAs in the Northwest that I would have to set up a system resource for?
Jeff, you can also use intertie transactions that you specify the gap in your cyber bid. You don't really have to register system resources unless the system resources are used for some contractual or certification method, like if you have array obligation on them, or if you want to participate in the capacity products, like, you know, provide reliability capacity, things
ETC,
like that. But if
TOR.
it's only for energy, TOR, yes, of course, if you have contracts, of course. But if it's just energy, import or export, yeah, you can use intertie transactions. You don't have to go through the process of registering all possible gap ties, obviously, yes.
Okay, that's helpful. And then on the ETC TOR, if Malin were the source of my ETC TOR going to some load in the ISO, it sounds like I would have to register a separate system resource for every possible source. But it also sounds like would my rebate
no, hold on. For what you said, going from the Malin intertie to load in the ISO, it sounds like you only need to register TSR type 1 pairs for that TOR, and it's picking up from the ISO side, right? On the other side, you don't have a contract.
That would be packed. I'm leaving that out of it. I'm thinking of if I source it from BPA.
So that's going to be dependent upon if it's coming from an EDAM BA versus EIM or non-EIM. If it's an EIM or non-EIM, it's no different than today when it comes to TORs, ETCs. You have to tell us all of the possible sources and sinks. Okay. So when you do schedule using that TOR or ETC, that settlements can calculate the balance portion and give you the hedge. So that process isn't going to change, but yes, you need to tell me all of the possible sources and all the possible sinks like you do today.
I don't like it, but I understand it. I can do that. It seems like my ETC TOR rebate would be different depending on which DGAP is used. In essence, the rebate might be refunding some congestion that happens above Malin for me between the generator and Malin, and that's not really my right.
So if you're referring to if that DGAP has contributions to an EDAM constraint, then you would receive the additional congestion hedge. But if you're referring to congestion that's within a non-EDAM BAA, we don't see it. We don't model that congestion in the LMP, so you're not going to get additional congestion exposure.
So in theory, I'm just going to pick two random, an import at Malin from Seattle City Light and day ahead, and an import using the Seattle City Light DGAP, and an import from Idaho Power using the Idaho Power DGAP would have the same source congestion component.
What will be different, and George touched on it, is the physical flow congestion associated with constraints from each of those DGAPs. That'll be your difference. Because you're coming in at the same intertie location, which is, in this case, would be Malin, the ITC, ISL congestion, the schedule limit congestion, is the same.
Okay. I'll have to think about that. If I'm taking possession at Malin, it doesn't seem like congestion above Malin should impact my hedge at all, good or bad.
You're still not taking congestion above Malin. What is being the separation is the shift factors between your DGAP at Seattle City and Light and your DGAP, I forgot the other one, Idaho. Relationship to those physical constraints within the EDAM footprint. That's the only difference between those two injections to get to Malin.
Okay, I'll go ponder that. Thank you for taking the questions.
Thank you. So in the interest of time, we'll just be taking one more question, and then we'll have another Q&A towards the end of the call to address any other questions. One more hand is Dan Williams, the Energy Authority. Go ahead, Dan.
Very, very quick question to clarify, and that's just relative to new real-time schedules. Is there anything that you can clarify or need to clarify for either new HASS schedules into the CAISO, or if there's some ability for a resource in an EIM area to transact intraday bilaterally with an EDAM area and then get the use the EIM optimization in a similar process to moving from the day ahead to real time?
Don, are you referring to a bilateral between an EDAM BAA and an EIM BAA?
Or vice versa? If you have say a bilateral intraday after the day ahead market close, would we think of that as just a fully outside the market and it's a base schedule between the two, or is this introducing a new opportunity?
It's a good question, Don, because if it's between EIM BAs, you can do it, of course, with a base transfer. But of course, there's no base transfer for EDAM BAA. So if you have a bilateral that you want to put in place in real time between an EDAM BAA and an EIM BAA, you don't have the option of a base transfer anymore, but there's another way you can do it. And it needs a little bit of preparation. You have an import or an export from that EDAM BAA to the AIM BAA in the day-ahead market. But if you don't want to commit it in the day-ahead market, you make it for 0 megawatts, all right? And in real time, you just change that schedule using the real-time schedule interface. Your BAA operator can do that. So if you have 100 megawatts bilateral in real time between, let's say, BPA and Portland General, okay, and it's from BPA to Portland General, okay, you have an import for 0 megawatts into Portland General from BPA DGUP, and then in real time you change that schedule to 100 megawatts, and you base schedule the supply in BPA.
And Dan, this goes a little bit with Jennifer's question. Is the ISO, as a market operator, we allow for the ability for those bilateral transactions that change between day ahead and real time to actually be reflected in the real time market. But the WEIMBA's OATs has that very strict timeline on base scheduling. And so it really is going to be dependent upon that WEIM's OAT, whether or not that bilateral transaction can be reflected in the real-time market as imbalance energy.
Right. Okay. And then just all the other things that we've been talking about apply for HASP as well. Like we're not getting rid of anything out of HASP today. It's just going to be using that same reference point either, but to a resource specific basis or a system resource.
Right. HASP itself is not being proposed to be changed.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Let's keep rolling.
Okay, thank you. So we will now be taking a short break for about 7 minutes until 3:05 Pacific time, and we'll return and discuss CRR model and settlement with James. Thank you, everyone. See you shortly. everyone, welcome back. James Lynn will now be leading us through a congestion revenue rights market and settlement discussion. James, are you ready?
Give me another minute and I'll be ready.
Sounds good. We'll be taking a couple more minutes of a break here. Thank you.
Okay, we can proceed with my slides. So I'm James Lynn, Principal, Market Settlement Design. I'm going to cover the CR Modeling and Settlement EDAM portion of the implementation workshop. This is a follow-up to our June 12th implementation workshop. If we can go to the next slide. As part of the June 12th implementation workshop, we did have a comment period and did receive some specific comments. These are broken into two areas. One was the modeling implementation. Everybody seemed to support the proposed improvements in modeling for external BA's flow in the CRR model. There has been a request for further implementation details on the modeling and the timing. And so that's one of the things I'm going to cover. And then there's going to be, there was more support for continued pursuit of further CR enhancements to incorporate EDAM BAA's flows. Now, we are not going to talk about that here, but it is something we are taking up for further discussions in future initiatives. The other area that was under discussion on June 12th was the CRR settlement. This one had more of a different reaction. I had more of a split. I have specific participants such as WPTF, DC Energy that supported the ISO settlement implementation proposal. As a temporary solution, they proposed that they supported the idea that CR settlement would be funded on an EDAM external constraints. And then for other participants such as CPUC, DMM, as well as many of the LSEs, they were opposed to this settlement. Now, until further enhancements, that's what they're expecting, is the ISO proposal settlement was inconsistent with the principles of CRR Track 1B, and it creates inappropriate cost exposure to ISO loads. Now, given all of this information, if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to break down the key elements of the implementation update into more information on the CRR modeling phased alignment. And I talked about these earlier. These are the CR enhancement, modeling of external flows, alignment of the CR model with the day-ahead model with EDAM activation, and aligning the CR release process with the CR modeling enhancements. And then for the CRR settlement revised alignment plan is to align the CRR settlement, the Track 1B calculation and the CR modeling enhancements, align the CR 1B calculations with EDAM participation, and then retain consistency with the CR 1B policy, EDAM policy, and congestion revenue allocation. The CR settlement of the CAISO BA congestion revenue, it'll include payments to CRRs on all constraints. However, that payment will have a pro rata allocation for underfunding associated with all constraints. And we will get into more detail what that means, but in short, the net outcome of this will be that CRRs will not be paid based on constraints where the ISO BA does not receive congestion revenue from IFM flow on that constraint. And lastly, we'll touch on future congestion revenue allocation design that could reduce or eliminate the need for CR1B proration allocation of these constraints. All right, next slide, please. So let's get into the CR model alignment. As George touched on earlier, if we go to the next slide, we are in the process of outlining or giving more details on how we are going to align the CRR model with the EDAM model and EDAM participation. As you know, the annual 2026 release process for CRR is currently started, and that release process is going to remain unchanged. We're using the current full network model definition, which includes intertie scheduling points for the ISO, and the CR model currently does not model external flows. We do have the break-even analysis informs the CR system that the CR availability at each intertie schedule point. So all of that happens today, and for this annual CRR process is going to happen in the future. With the annual 2027 release CRR, the annual process begins in August of 2026. That annual process we're expecting to be based on the full network model, which contains the GGAP, DGAP tie definition. This means CRR awards at the ISO boundary will be based upon, I have here SGAP, but it should be the generic gap, DGAP tie definitions. We will use historical day-ahead demand forecast to enhance the CRR model to address external BAA flows. So we're getting more details on what that means as we talk about the monthly. So if we go to the next slide, this is where the details on the overall phase process comes into play. In 2026, between January and April of 2026, the current CR model, and since the day-ahead market model reflects scheduling points and tie combinations, the monthly CRR release process is going to continue as it does today. You're going to have the full network model will continue to include CAL-ISO intertie scheduling points definition. There is, in the market, we will continue to have the scheduling point tie participation for import-export resources, and we'll continue to apply the global D rate across ISO transmission constraints to account for external flows. Now, starting May of 2026, this is a phase one approach when we're trying to align the monthly CR release process with EDAM activation. We will have the monthly CR process will remain unchanged. What that means is they'll use the current FMM model, which retains the ISO intertie scheduling points definition. This is because this release process starts not May of 2026, it'll actually start in March of 2026. At that point, the gap tie definitions have not been promoted to the full network model, and so we will be using the full network model that is appropriate for that time frame. However, we are going to introduce some enhancements into the CRR model that will account for external flows better. We'll be using historical day-ahead demand forecast to model external BAA flows with a balanced source and sink pair. And so whatever that day-ahead demand forecast for that BAA, we will model as an injection in that BAA at the DGAP, and then a withdrawal within that BAA at the DLAP. So that'll give our source and sink pair. It'll be treated in a similar manner as we do ETC TORs, And then when we do the simultaneous feasibility study, we'll be able to account for those flows that will have impacts on ISO constraints and ISO, including ISO intertie transactions, and we will award CRRs accordingly. We are also proposing to retain tools, including such as a global derate factor, break-even analysis. Those tools may require some modifications, but we want to retain those tools to account for any elements that are not explicitly accounted for in the model associated with flows. It could be other transmission outages. It could be other elements that it tells us that our releasing of our CR offerings has to be a certain level, and we will still retain those tools to inform us. Now, the targeting of July 2026, this is a phase 2 approach. Now, this is to make the CRR model and the day-ahead model in alignment. At this point, where the monthly CR release process will be enhanced to align with the day-ahead FMM, which includes the gap tie, because the July release, the timing of the start of that will be May of 2026, and that full network model will reflect the gap tie definitions. We will have to translate the annual CRRs from 2026 at the ISO boundary to a gap tie definition in the CRR model. And then we will allow the monthly offerings, and we'll run the simultaneous feasibility study based upon both the annual and the monthly offerings. The CRR awards at that point will be at a gap tie definition and not at the ISO scheduling point. As I said above, we are going to continue to have the enhancement of the external flows using the demand forecast and creating these balanced source and sink pairs, and we also are going to retain some additional tools. After 2026, there is going to be continued studies on improving the accounting for external flows, but that is not going to be covered in this particular workshop. Okay, so we go to the next slide. So I did a little graphical representation to give you an idea of how this is going to transition. Under the current CR model, the interties are being modeled at the scheduling point at our boundary. When we go from our current model to the phase 1 model, we will retain the scheduling points at the ISO boundary, but we will now start accounting for all external BAAs flows by creating these gap to DLAP pairs associated with the load forecast. And when we do the offering in the CR model, the CR holders will bid at the ISO scheduling point like they do in the current CR model. Now if we go to the next slide, this represents how the transition is going to go from phase 1 to phase 2. In phase 1, as we said, we are still allowing for CRR purchases at the scheduling point of the ISO. Now, what we're going to introduce with the phase 2 is that it's going to be a gap tie. This includes the generic gaps north and south to a tie, as well as the individual BAA's gap to tie CRR nominations and auction, CR release process. So as you are bidding in for CRRs, you would choose your appropriate gap tie combination, and the CRR model will then run the simultaneous feasibility study and do awarding accordingly. So how does this translate into CR1B? That's the next phase of this discussion. If we go to the next slide, actually, go one more after that. So CR1B calculation. This is going to be performed, and we have a specific engine that does this calculation that feeds it to settlements. And there has to be some mitigation measures that have to be applied in each of these stages to align the CR1B calculation with the CRR model enhancements. So for prior to April 2026, or between January and April 2026, nothing changes. You will be awarded CRRs on the ISO scheduling point. CR1B will consume those CRR awards and will do the CRR flow based upon those constraints, those scheduling points to the constraints based upon the shift factors. And the payout to the CR holders will remain the same as well. CR1B determination after EDAM go live, the annual or monthly CRRs which are at the ISO boundary scheduling points will need to be mapped to a gap tie. And when I put SP tie there, I'm referring to the G-gap tie. SP tie, the tie is the key element here. The scheduling point is still the ISO scheduling point. The tie is reference to the intertie location where it crosses our border. So the CR1B will calculate CR megawatt flow for all impacted constraints. The scheduling point mapping to the internal constraints will be based upon the ISO scheduling point and the shift factors associated between that scheduling point and the internal constraints. The intertie mapping will give you the mapping to the scheduling limit constraints, the ITC ISL. And that is because the model, the full network model for the day-ahead market will be having the scheduling limit constraints associated directly to the tie and not to the scheduling points of the ISL. Therefore, when we go to CR1B for the IFM flow, this is excluding ETC, TOR, and open cell schedules, you will have your gap mapping to internal constraints and your intertie mapping to this ITC ISL constraints as we do today. And so that you'll see that your CRR flow to the ITC ISL and your IFM flow to the ITC ISL will be the same. The only difference is going to be the CRR flow to internal constraints based upon physical flow and the shift factors associated between that scheduling point to internal constraint versus the gap scheduling point to the internal constraint. Now, when we go to CR1B, determination after go live, the phase 2, which we are targeting for July based on what I said earlier, the CRR system will have converted any annual CRRs to a gap tie definition, and then your monthly awards will be on a gap tie definition, and therefore your CRR megawatts will be, and your IFM flow mapping will be the same. You'll have your gap scheduling points mapped to the internal constraints, and your intertie will be mapped to your scheduling constraints for CRRs, and then your IFM will have a similar, you'll have your gap scheduling point to internal constraints, and then your intertie to the ITC ISL constraints. So how does this play out from a settlement perspective? You actually see our settlement. Go to the next slide. All right. So this one's actually even a little simplified. It is going to be driven by upstream systems calculations or translation of the CRR megawatts to the appropriate constraints. But between January and April 2026, you're going to settle the same way as you do today. Your CRR settlement is funded by the IFM energy schedule with effectiveness on the constraints. Since the ISO is the only balancing authority area in the day-ahead market is going to be based upon intertie transactions at our boundary as well as internal schedules, IFM energy schedules to the constraints, and then your CRB, CR1B settlement will be continually calculated daily with a monthly resettlement. So in other words, nothing changes. What the CRR settlement today is what you'll see in January through April of 2026. Starting with the EDAM Go Live, which is May of 2026, you will see some differences. First, CR settlement will be funded by IFM energy and imbalance reserve schedules with effectiveness on those constraints. I need to ensure that the CRR settlement is in alignment with CRR Track 1B policy and EDAM policy, and ensures that the CRR settlement is paid from day-ahead congestion revenue collected for the ISO BAA. And what that means is if I have a constraint in an external BAA in which we are not collecting any IFM congestion revenue, it will not be paid out to CR holders as per the CRR Track 1B policy. If there's any IFM schedules that have impacts on ISO constraints, they will be funded from those IFM schedules, and therefore all internal ISO constraints will be used to fund the CRR holders, or basically the CRR settlement, based upon the amount of energy or amount of money collected at that constraint. As I said earlier, we're going to continue to do it daily and with a monthly resettlement. If you go to the next slide. So I went through relatively quickly. I was able to go relatively quickly because George touched on a portion of this earlier, but I'm opening it up for any questions.
Thanks, James. First in the queue, we have Callie Wells.
Hey, James, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Couple questions. My first one is back more on your first section when you're going over the CR modeling changes. And so I just want to focus in on kind of that May 1st phase one, you guys are calling it that period. So because there's this misalignment between what's in the day ahead market being those new gaps that we just talked about versus what the CRRs have, which is still the tie points that we have today. Am I correct in understanding that a CR, so if I have a CR from Palo Verde to SP15, in this transition period, that phase one, my CRR is going to still settle on PV to SP15, but my energy cost exposure is from the DGAP to SP15. So there could be a discrepancy there, meaning I actually don't fully hedge myself.
So yes, I want to qualify that. So your Palo Verde to SP15, your ITC and ISL congestion associated with Palo Verde intertie, you will get full funding as you would today. That's because both the IFM schedules associated with that intertie, as well as the CRR awards associated with the intertie, is going to have the same shift factors applied. So where the differences comes in is the fact that as not just the ISO, but as EDAM participants bid in at the DGAP to the appropriate intertie, if that DGAP or SGAP to the ISO intertie is the bid-in location for the energy and it's awarded, you do have that disconnect. You're going to have shift factors differences between, I think George pointed out would be Malin 5 and 101 for physical flow constraints versus the DGAP of, let's say, BPAT to that same constraint.
Okay, so the value of my CR hedge could differ from my congestion cost exposure based on my energy schedules. Only during that first phase, and then once everything's aligned, we're all good there. Okay.
Well, before you move on, there's another element. The other element, and I was hoping that I touched on it, and maybe I blew past it fast, is that you will have EDAM constraints that will have impacts on your CRR flow as well as your IFM flow. And based upon feedback from the participants, the CRR process, 1B revenue allocation, is based upon what revenues the ISO-BAA receives. This is a sub-allocation associated only with the ISO-BAA. So if I'm not receiving, if the ISO-BAA is not receiving any congestion revenue from IFM schedules or impacts on that constraint, then we're going to give it a complete CR1B, I hate using this word, but a haircut. In essence, you won't be funded on EDAM constraints.
Yeah, no, actually you didn't breeze by that. That was my second question. So on that one, can you shed a little bit more light on why the CAISO pivoted? So the June meeting, the CAISO's proposal was to provide full funding for congestion cost exposure due to constraints occurring in the EDAM BAA. And at that time, it was, you know, equitable treatment to OAT rights that were being self-scheduled, and we felt was an appropriate cost causation allocation because that would just come out of the CR balancing account instead of being a haircut to the CR holders. So I'm hoping you can shed a little bit more light on why the CAISO pivoted its policy proposal.
So there's two main points that were made that informed us to do a different settlement of CRR1B. One is it was correctly pointed out to us that CRRs is a sub-allocation for the ISO-BAA. And it's a sub-allocation of any congestion revenue in which we receive from the day-ahead market. As part of that, since I'm not receiving any congestion revenue associated with those EDAM constraints, then it was inappropriate for me to do a full funding of the CRR for that constraint. The second element that went into the discussion was, based on our proposal, it was potentially unduly impacting load, so it would be additional costs that would be borne by load, and that, again, wasn't part of the CRR1B implementation. So a lot of it has to do with the fact we're just trying to align with the CR1B initiative and the EDAM policy initiatives.
Okay, I guess I would push back on that a little bit. The Track 1B, so first, the Track 1B policy was done well ahead of EDAM. And that conversation, the way we ended up with the allocation of underfunding today on that constraint by constraint basis was under the presumption that it aligned with cost causation, and any remaining underfunding that existed was due to differences in transmission capacity available in the CR model versus IFM, right? So basically, in the CR model, the CAISO oversold or overallocated too many CRs, and it wasn't collecting enough congestion in the IFM. So because of that, it was appropriate to allocate it back to the CR holders. Obviously, in that effort, we were recognizing that that's not necessarily the case with the remaining underfunding. There's other factors. And so this is something similar to that in my mind, is that the underfunding that we're talking about, or this haircut that we're talking about, isn't because of differences in transmission between the CR model and the IFM and the CAISO BAA. It's a market design decision. And so I question whether or not it's appropriate to have the CR holders fully take on this cost versus what you guys had proposed previously, which seemed to align more with the cost causation, or allocating appropriately based on cost causation, and that was have it go into the CR balancing account. So I would push back on that, especially given the conversations going on in the CR enhancements as well, and also recognizing the reason we're not collecting congestion isn't because of differences in modeling. It was a market design decision. So I'll leave it at that. I was disappointed to see that change. Didn't quite fully understand where that was coming from. So I'll leave it at that, but thanks.
But thank you, Kelly. I do want to point out one thing is that once we do start receiving congestion revenue based on EDAM constraints, once we figure out what that appropriate revenue, then at that point, similar with the CR1B policy, we would be performing CR1B settlement. So it is a transition, but I do hear you and I appreciate your comments.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Daniel Kretu.
Everyone, James, this is Daniel Kretu with California Department of Water Resources. If you go back to slide 31, the question, actually there might be two, but probably could be the same answer. Right now, let's say we are in July 2026, actually, yes, at the end of the month, we can submit the HLD for 2027. That's probably gonna be unchanged. But on participation on tier 1 of 2027, if we have previous year annual CRRs, 2026 CRRs at Interties, current, Palo Verde was mentioned, and let's say Palo Verde to inside ISO, our load, our sink, how we'll be able to renominate those in priority nominate 2027 priority nomination tier.
So let's go back to slide 22, I think is what you're referring to. You're talking about the annual process, or for 31 where we're talking about the monthly process?
We're talking about annual.
Yep.
Renominating.
I just want to make sure I have it, your question correct. So what was going to happen is in the CRR1B system, for the period of May to when we can get the CR model in alignment with the day-ahead model, we are going to retain the scheduling point of the ISO scheduling point. So it's going to be, let's say in this case, it's Malin. Now, what we're going to add on to there is the association to the intertie where Malin is being injected or withdrawn from the ISO border. This will give us that ability to ensure that the ISL ITC constraints are correctly accounted for, both from a CRR megawatt flow as well as the IFM flow. From a CRR megawatt flow, we're going to use the scheduling point of Malin 5 N101 and its relevant shift factor to the other internal constraints to determine that as the CR flow. And then from an IFM flow, we're going to be using the day-ahead awards. When we get to the targeted, where the CR model and the full network model for the day-ahead are in alignment, the CRR system, what it's going to do for those nominations is we're going to move all that annual CRRs to the super gap tie.
So ISO does that automatically?
Yes, we'll do that automatically. And then when you do your monthly nominations and you'll be looking and decide exactly which DGAP, or if you want to put in alignment, you can choose the same generic gap tie combination, and we will run the simultaneous feasibility test.
I'm not talking monthly. I'm talking 2027 priority nomination tier when the CRR requested by season and time of use.
So that for the 2027 annual, we should be using one of the reasons why we're targeting of July of 2026 is to ensure that the annual for 2027 is based upon the full network model that is in the day ahead. And that would be the gap tie model. So at that point, the 2027, you will be bidding in or nominating at the gap tie, the appropriate gap tie, and from that point forward, 2027 should all be on the same model as the day ahead market.
Well, the question then is, ISO will tell me, or automated system ISO told me how, let's say 100 megawatts from Moline to Edmonston will change to get D gap and G gap or whatever the terminologies are. They will tell me, the automatic system, what my entitlement is, because it'll be that conversion from what I have today from Moline to
what we will do is part of the 2027 annual process, we will inform you of all the combinations of the gap tie to Malin, and then as part of your nomination, you will choose the appropriate gap tie that you wanted to reference, and that will be what we will use in the CRR process.
Well, the combination, should be determined on what CRRs I have in previous 2026 from Moline to Edmonston. So ISO should tell me the amount. That combination, I don't know if I can calculate that.
Philip, did you want to address this question?
Well, I can follow up with CD Ticket and, maybe explain better the question. It ties up to the second question: what happened to long-term CRRs that are currently, and I think it's the same method that apply to priority nomination tier renomination on this EDAM implemented in 2027, which is first year when the EDAM and DAME is implemented.
So I think you're referring to the long-term CRRs.
Well, priority nomination tier renomination, that's called priority nomination tier. To some extent, it's a long-term CRRs. It's just 1 year long-term CRRs. Could be considered the same as a 1 year long-term CRR.
Yeah, this is Philip Roth on the CRR team. Maybe I can jump in a little bit there. So I think I understand the question. So really what you're asking about, if I understand correctly, is like your signature pair data for the tier 1 PNP process. So if you had awards from the prior annual allocation that were at the current scheduling point, then what would be your
Yes.
path and eligible megawatts in the prior years, or sorry, in the upcoming year?
Yes.
I think we'll have to take that one back and review that before we could answer that, but we'll certainly take that offline and get back.
Okay.
With that
Do I
answer.
need to issue a CD ticket with that question?
It'd probably be helpful to help track it if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Kathleen Colbert from Vistra.
Great, thank you. First, I know earlier I'd asked a question, and James, you had mentioned that we get back to the implementation. I think we've had a lot of questions, so I'm fine with that being tabled. I just would reemphasize that the differences in the settlement of the IFM versus the CRR models when they are run can lead to very adverse outcomes and can exacerbate the issues that are driving the CRR enhancements effort. And so I think it would behoove the CAISO to do everything it can to work with the EDAM entities to see what could be done from a schedule or priority perspective to minimize this risk. So I'll just throw that out there so that you hear me how important it is.
Yeah, so Kathleen, no, part of these slides is we're erring on the side of caution. We are reaching out to our vendor right now.
Okay.
We will shoot for it. We'll do our best to try to get it in by May of 2026. The concern or the reason why we're erring on the side of caution is that the monthly for May of 2026 starts in March of 2026. And so that shortens the timeline even further. So I'd rather have you have knowledge that there might be this short period of time that we have to do this translation, and you count for it accordingly, than to set expectations that we potentially don't meet.
Yeah, I appreciate that. If it's all right to respond and say that I'm struggling with how to account for it accordingly. The annual options will be difficult enough for me to communicate that the network model footprint is completely different starting mid-year. When we get to the monthlies, that was my one hope, to be honest, is to be able to communicate annuals are going to be real rough and inaccurate. And the best that we could hope for is the monthly to really try to hedge our needs. If it's shifted like this without historical data to try to understand the delta, right, of what these MCCs might look like, I just feel very flat-footed. So I hear you 100%. I understand what you're saying. I hope you're hearing that I don't know how to help, and I'm not sure the data exists to help us predict that going into any monthlies with these differences. And so I'm just worried about it. That's all. The second thing I wanted, thank you. The second thing I wanted to flag, I've tried to bring this up in a couple different venues, and so wanted to use this again. I've been hoping at some point we would be having the conversations about the transmission outage reporting. I've brought this up at a couple different calls, including the CR enhancements calls, about how important it is that we make sure that all entities that participate in the day-ahead market are submitting those transmission maintenance outage plans on the timelines that are in the tariff. We have July 1st of each year. I know we passed that by for this one, but for the 2027 auction annual timeline, that's July 1st of 2026. And then the 30 days prior to the first day of the month for the monthlies, that we might be able to implement for the monthlies once EDAM goes live. So I'm just going to continue asking, because as y'all know, not having those plans has led to issues with our model being set up in a way that minimizes adverse outcomes. So I just appreciate you hearing me. Okay. Section 9.3.6.1 and 9.3.6.4.2 are the two tariff sections that refer to those transmission outage reporting requirements, and they need to be amended to extend to the EDAM entities, which I understand requires a tariff. I'm hoping we start talking about that ASAP.
Okay. Look, I assume you, and I'm going to make an assumption that either you've submitted a city ticket. If you haven't, go ahead and submit another city ticket with outlining your request, and we can review it. We don't have the appropriate people here to answer or respond to your statement right now.
No, that's fine. That's interesting. I would never have thought to do that. So I will maybe reach out and get guidance from customer service as to what that ticket should look like. I've been raising these on my policy calls because it requires a tariff. But yeah, that's a really good suggestion. Thank you, James. The last thing I did want to touch on was more substance, but I wanted to tackle the really practical one first. I did just want to go back to the conversation you were having with Callie. I'm going to be very honest that I didn't know there was an opportunity to provide you feedback on a debate. I wasn't aware there was an open debate on this topic. From a policy perspective, so I think for cost causation principles aren't just a recommendation. I believe they're a mandate. So I believe the CAISO is mandated to make sure that its rates on file through its tariff reflect that costs that a specific customer class actually either impose or create are reflected back at that customer class. The cost causation principles established by FERC were done so very intentionally in order to prevent one group from subsidizing another group's transmission benefits. And it's very clear that this is more of a cost causation issue than anything to do with CRR 1B. In fact, I don't think CRR 1B is even relevant to this topic. If we were to start from where we should in a policy conversation, which is where I hope we would have started, which is who benefits from the extension of EDAM, and then who benefits from the EDAM congestion revenue allocation changes that were just filed at FERC. Well, from an EDAM perspective, as you all know, EDAM is being pursued for the purpose of seeking load benefits through reducing our energy rates inside California, as well as the other EDAM entities are seeking similar benefits as well. The purpose of these reduced energy rates is coming, or that the results of that is due to us extending our footprint and accessing resource and load diversity from a wider footprint. That is clearly a benefit to load. The second thing I wanted to make sure we were thinking about from a benefit perspective is that the EDAM congestion revenue allocation design did actually review this and tackle this question. And a very important and salient quote from the final proposal is that with the introduction of EDAM, again, EDAM is the driver, with the introduction of EDAM as a part of the CRR congestion revenue allocation design, the CAISO will be allocated, just wait one second, please, 1 second, will be allocated additional congestion revenues, which it does not receive today. These additional congestion revenues will flow to the CAISO CRR balancing account, which helps fund CRR settlement, putting downward pressure and reducing CRR underfunding risk. And I just want to close and then.
Kathleen, I just want to mention that this isn't a policy call and it's an implementation call. So if you can submit any concerns you have via a city ticket.
I appreciate it, Christina. And I was just about to close out, as I do understand that. And I'm very disappointed no policy call was held on this. And I will be not just submitting the city ticket, but I will be escalating this appropriately. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Doug Boccignone. Go ahead, Doug.
Doug Boccignone with Flynn Resource Consultants for the Bay Area Municipal Transmission Group. I had some follow-up questions on how you're applying the phase or the CRR1B, which just, it makes a lot of sense to me. But the question I have is, you mentioned that you'll be, for the long-term CRRs, you'll be mapping them. Wouldn't you have to also do the mapping for the seasonal CRRs that get allocated for Q2 and 3 and 4?
Yes, we will, any of the appropriate CRRs as they come into, whether it's the CRR model or CRR system or the CRR1B system, we will be doing the appropriate mapping to the tie, or when we get into phase 2, we're actually doing the gap tie combination. You're correct. I just didn't go into detail of all the variations that would have to require the mapping. Okay,
and then when you do the mapping, would each CRR essentially get sort of the weighted average, the distribution back to the DGAPs? In other words, so like it's not going to matter who holds the CRR, it'll sort of be proportional?
Well, since we don't know what the specific DGAP that the CRR holder is going to be scheduling from, we are going to be using the generic gap. And so therefore you're going to get the pricing impacts of all of the BAAs that are within the EDAM market.
Okay. So I mean, that makes sense. But so, in thinking about some of the issues that Kathleen and Callie had raised in terms of settlement mismatches, I'm just wondering why. I mean, obviously we can't nominate the model's not going to be set up until in time for the July, hopefully, or maybe for May, as you just stated. But it seems like from a settlement standpoint, though, since you're already going to have to map the seasonal CRRs and the long-term CRRs anyway, why wouldn't you settle them to the generic gap? Or is that what you're planning on doing?
No, so that was a somewhat of an internal discussion as to whether or not it was appropriate to move the ISO scheduling point to the SGAP. It was just it seemed more appropriate, since you had bid in at that scheduling point, that your CRR notional value should be based upon that scheduling point association to the internal constraints. Well, our main purpose of moving it to the tie was so that you ensure that you get the ISL and ITC constraint mapped correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just seemed to me, because, I mean, in the market, we're going to be settled even not to the SGAP, right? It'll really be based on all the resources. And
Correct.
But it seems like there might be more alignment to the generic gap than to the intertie point. And so it's like, we know we're not gonna, when we're nominating these CRRs, we know they're not going to be perfectly matched, and we know there's going to be, like, for example, you're going to be doing the 1B haircut calculations that are going to be impacted by this mapping. So why not try to link them up? Just an idea.
We can take that back and have some more internal discussions, but one of the reasons why we kept at the scheduling point is that as a CR holder, your effectiveness on those internal constraints will be higher, and so dependent upon what the overall market flow, IFM flow on that constraint, could give you a more complete funding than if I moved you out to the generic gap.
Sure. Okay. Just an additional question. For the modeling in the phase 2, where well, I guess you'll also be doing this in phase 1, where you're modeling the flows.
Yes.
And you're gonna essentially assume a balance between the historical load, and then you'll have a balanced generation.
Yeah.
And you talked about using a historical forecast, and do you mean literally like a forecast from back then, or do you mean use historical data to create a forecast?
Using historical data to determine the what you would determine is that the historical flow within that BAA. So if I say from a historical perspective, I see that a specific BAA, let's say an average, let's say the average forecast is about 1,200 megawatts. Well, then I'm going to assume that you had 1,200 megawatts of generation to meet that 1,200 megawatts of demand, and therefore we've created a source and sink pair that's similar to a TOR ETC that is now going to use to inform the CRR model of your impact on ISO constraints.
Okay, and then it makes sense to me to do something like that at least for part of the picture, but the part that's missing is the imports and exports, right? You're not proposing to model those.
No, because that's where you're going to be. We're just trying to model the external flows of the BAA in itself, and then everything else is going to be the same as it is today.
Right.
So no, we're not going to.
Yeah, you're not going to capture. You're just going to capture sort of if they had balanced loads and resources, what the flow impacts on the other BAAs is, but without taking into consideration imbalances between their loads and resources.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Majidi from the Energy Authority.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentation. This is Majid Majidi from the Energy Authority. I have two questions. So I'll begin with my first question. Could you please elaborate on the allowed source and sinks for EDM participants versus the classic ISO participants in the CRR market? So that is my first question. And yeah, I can ask the other one after your response.
Okay, so right now, the CRR application is only within the ISO Balancing Authority area. We are not extending it to the EDAM Balancing Authority area. There will be future discussions on the whether or not it should, or if there is an implementation that can align for that same type of financial product. It's just at this time, it's only going to apply for the ISO Balancing Authority area.
Okay, got it. Thank you. And my second question, and my apologies if this is already addressed, but maybe I missed it. How will this new structure, EDM market being added to the CAISO market, will benefit load-serving entities inside CAISO to better manage their congestion risks exposure? What would be the main benefit?
Will be the main benefit? Well, first is, I'm trying to.
This is presenting things more accurately,
Can
right?
you rephrase that question again?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of making the market more competitive, how will adding EDM market, launching it in 2026, and combining that with the CRR market for CAISO will help load-serving entities in CAISO footprint to better manage their congestion risk?
Right, I misunderstood. The reason I asked you to restate, I misunderstood your question. So the EDM market is going to allow for more economic displacement or dispatching of resources across a footprint that will benefit all of the load within the EDAM footprint. This then, when it comes to a CRR perspective, the purpose of the CRR is to provide them with a hedge to their congestion exposure between their source and sink locations or the load that's being served. Now, by allowing for more economic displacement, you potentially reduce the amount of congestion exposure there's going to be overall in the day-ahead market. It is really going to be dependent upon the conditions of that day-ahead market, but ultimately, by having more balancing authority areas offering generation to serve the overall load, you then help facilitate a more economic dispatch and pricing of your energy to serve that load. Secondly, we are introducing the concept of imbalance reserve. Imbalance reserve is allowing for us to reserve capacity from generation to meet potentially demand changes between day ahead and real time. Congestion revenue associated with that imbalance reserve is also going to go to fund the appropriate CRR holder if it's related to an ISO constraint. And so both of those, the day ahead, extending the day ahead market to other balancing authority area provides more control variables as well as economic LMP signals for generation to meet that load. Does that help?
I believe so.
Thank you, Majid.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Chunyu Luo.
I have a question. Actually, I just want to make sure I hear that right. On page 32, for the CRR1B settlement after the EDAM go live May 2026. So on the second bullet, you says it align with the CRR1B policy and other policies, and it's paid from their head congestion revenue collect for CAISO BAA. And I thought you also say that if the congestion does not receive revenue, so it will not be getting paid.
So as we do CR, so I'll take a step approach on this. Is CRR is a sub-allocation methodology for congestion revenue that has been collected for the ISO Balancing Authority area. For the EDAM Balancing Authority areas, we call it the congestion offset account. For the ISO, that's a congestion balancing account. So as you determine what congestion revenue should be used to fund a CRR holder, you look to see what congestion you collected at a constraint in relationship to the CRR megawatts at that constraint. At EDAM Go Live, based upon EDAM policy, only congestion revenue associated with ISO constraints will go and fund our congestion balancing account or offset account, which is then used to pay out the CR holders. And so until that time, at which time we start collecting congestion on the EDAM constraint into our balancing account, at that point, then the CR holders will receive additional congestion settlement for those constraints. So it's all going to be related to the fact that CRR is a sub-allocation for the ISO Balancing Authority area, and if I don't collect congestion on that constraint for the ISO Balancing Authority area, I cannot fund the CRR at that constraint.
Okay. So I just tried to compare what I heard from June 12th. And so maybe this is just, I'm thinking from the California ratepayer standpoint. So this is, it's because in the June 12th, I believe what I hear is that regardless in the balance account, which is what California ratepayer is responsible for, it's have to fund that. But now the second bullet, basically it's kind of step back a little bit. If we do not receive the revenue on that congestion point, then there's no money in the balance account and there's nothing to pay out. Is that correct understanding?
Correct. So
Okay.
yeah, correct. In the June 12th, the ISO had proposed that we would, if you had congestion, a CRR to an EDAM constraint, you would receive full funding regardless of whether or not the ISO balancing account, ISO BAA, collected any congestion revenue. Based upon the input of various different parties, we reevaluated that, and we did conclude that since it is a sub-allocation of the ISO offset or balancing account, I should be paying out only on that which I collect. And so yes, that is the change, is you will not get full funding on EDAM constraint instead of, until at which time we do collect congestion on EDAM constraint, we will not be paying out on an EDAM constraint.
Great, thank you. Thanks for clarifying.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Callie Wells. Go ahead, Callie.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. I just wanted to circle back on that discussion with Kathleen and share my perspective. Well, I appreciate that a lot of what we've gone through today are implementation details. There's a lot of technical stuff out there, and we appreciate you guys sharing that information with us. I have to respectfully disagree with you guys characterizing this as solely an implementation meeting. James, you just used the word proposed. You guys back in June proposed one sort of settlement or approach for CRRs. And now today you're changing that proposal. We're talking about changing how costs are being shifted between entities, and that day in and day out is 100% a policy conversation. It is not an implementation detail. So again, and you just characterize it as a proposal. Again, respectfully disagree that this is, especially this element, is a implementation detail. And I really hope you guys can bring this to a more public forum and have a more robust conversation about this, especially because of this all of a sudden pivot on this specific aspect of the meeting today. And there are other little things that have kind of been throughout the meeting too that, you know, kind of cross over a little bit into the policy realm. But I just had to share my reaction to characterizing this as an implementation meeting. I have to disagree that it's solely implementation details we're going over today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kit. So Callie, so there will be future discussions on how, that was we've characterized before, reciprocity occurs when in relationship to congestion revenue allocation. That is the point when we'll cross over from implementation into the policy discussion, and I believe that's the appropriate place to have this discussion further.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Steve Turi. Go ahead, Steve.
All right, can you hear me now?
I can hear you, Steve.
Yeah, so I have a question. It's from actually earlier in the presentation, slide 10, actually. Yes, this one. So we're looking at static ETSRs with Seattle City Light. We're still, getting used to them. And just a question regarding like interties here and static ETSRs. So for the KAISO side of the static ETSR, would that go with the gap tie LMP, like for the BGAP, BPAT DGAP, or would it go with the SP tie with the Malin? I guess which tie should we be using?
So when we establish the ETSRs, we establish a transfer location, and that transfer location has another version of an SP tie. The tie that is related to, if it's associated with the ISL balancing authority area, it will include ITC and ISL congestion associated with it. It's not quite a DGAP tie. It is a transfer location tie combination.
So
and it'll have its own shift factors, its own sorry, I lost my train of thought. Hold on a second.
No worries.
All right, I have a little bird in my ear. So, so the transfer location, where it's different than the gap tie, is the transfer location, because it's an optimal use of the transmission. It's only going to reflect the marginal energy costs plus any ITC ISL congestion associated with that intertie or that transfer location. So if you look at this slide, you won't have any marginal loss component of the LMP, and you shouldn't have a marginal greenhouse gas component of the LMP. It's only going to be the marginal energy costs plus any ITC ISL congestion.
And this would be for the static ETSR?
It'd be for all TSRs and ETSRs.
Oh.
So I just like to refer them all as transfer system resources, regardless of static or dynamic or day ahead. It's the transfer system resources will have the same pricing.
Gotcha. And sorry, yeah, you mentioned, no marginal loss costs. And then what was the other portion that you said that it would not have?
Greenhouse gas.
Greenhouse gas.
So it should reflect only the marginal energy costs and the marginal congestion costs associated with the ITC ISL. No physical congestion loss, congestion applying as well.
Gotcha. So yeah, so any like I guess, yeah, for that, like in our case, yeah, that static ETSR, like it doesn't matter if it's that gap tie or that SP tie.
Yeah, so depending on which side you're on, if you're on the ISO side of that transfer, your LMP will reflect the ISO's marginal energy costs, plus any ITC-ISL associated, in this case, we'll say it's Malin. Whereas on the Seattle City and Light side of the transfer, it'll reflect Seattle City and Light's marginal energy costs and any ITC-ISL associated with the Seattle City and Light side of the transfer. That's where the transfer revenue is going to come in play. And we talked about that previously, several other workshops ago. If there's any differences between the marginal energy costs of Seattle City and Light and the marginal energy costs of the ISO in this scenario, there's transfer revenue that'll be paid out to either the EDM entity, or if you actually are a transmission customer scheduling your own rights, or sorry, releasing transmission, you'll get a direct payment for that transfer revenue.
Okay, yeah. So bottom line, it doesn't super matter if we use that gap tie LMP or that SP tie, since, you know, we're just dealing with TSR. Or am I?
Yeah, so from a CRR perspective, great question. So if you think about it, if it's coming from Seattle City and Light, that means the generation that is supporting that transfer is basically going to be priced in the DGAP of Seattle City and Light. So your CRR should be from the DGAP Seattle City and Light to the intertie where it crosses the ISO border. And that allows you to give an appropriate signal from a CRR perspective on which constraints you are going to be impacted by.
And that's, yeah, okay, that's from the Seattle City Light side. For like the Kaiser side, it would be different. For the
are we talking intertie pricing or CRR?
The pricing.
Okay, so for intertie participation, you would as we talked about what the pricing would be, and so from an ISO side, as I said, it's the marginal energy cost of the ISO plus any ISL ITC constraint associated with that transfer. And Seattle City and Light is going to be Seattle City and Light's marginal energy costs and any ITC ISL associated with that transfer. When it comes to CRR, I'm going to take it to that next step. CRR, since you are only buying the CRR within the ISO balancing authority area, and you're trying to account for energy that is coming into the ISO balancing authority area through transfer, you would want to buy a CRR at the Seattle City Light DGAP with the associated tie of the ISO, where it's crossing into ISO. In this case, it would be Malin. That gives the appropriate settlement for the CRR for IFM flow of the energy going from Seattle City Light to the ISO balancing authority area.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Yeah, I think that answers what I need. So thank you.
And yeah, if you weren't sure where it's coming from, use a generic gap. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Abram Klein from Appian Way. Go ahead, Abram.
Hi, this is Abram Klein with Appian Way Energy Partners. I wanted to follow up on Callie and Kathleen's comment regarding the switch with respect to the treatment of CRRs, and just make an additional point, which is that the WEM board approved the changes to how you are handling collection of congestion rights for firm OAT rights, perhaps in part, and I think in part, based on addressing the differential treatment that California had proposed, where you're saying that we're going to fully fund OAT rights for EDAM participants, non-Cal ISO, and not just not fully fund, but not fund at all California rights, California firm rights, which are in the form of CRRs. So I do think that there is a bit of a switch here, because I think the approval was based on addressing something that would have mitigated that inequitable treatment and I would argue discriminatory treatment. And I'm wondering if there was any consideration given to the alternative policy, which was to, if you're changing the tariff to say that EDAM entities with firm rights get to collect based on the sink of where the congestion occurs. Why not have that policy change to allow that for CRRs as well?
So the board, my understanding, the board approval regarding the congestion revenue allocation was predicated or was partially informed that the ISO would take up additional policy discussion on how to create a same reciprocity treatment for the ISO balancing authority area, and it wasn't necessarily predicated on our June 12th discussion. Now, we are still expecting to and proposing to in Q4 is start talking about that reciprocity treatment for the ISO, and then get the appropriate discussion as to what it should be, and then we will get an idea of what the implementation timeline, so that we can reduce any of this exposure going forward.
Yeah, and
is the plan to do that on an expedited basis, or?
Really, this is Khalid from CAISO. I want to jump in here to relieve some of my project team here. Again, our intention here in this call is to stay within the current approved policies as is, which is the EDAM policy, which allows us to determine for us what we are collecting. And we want to stay with the CRR track 1B policy, which determines what we, how we are sub-allocating. So all what my people here are saying, James and others, is whatever we are allowed to collect, we will be sub-allocating. That's all what we are saying. Now, there is a discussion about that. The June 12th had some idea. It is not a policy. It was just ideas, and it's still there, and the door is still open for what, if that discussion turns into a change in policy, the implementation team will definitely follow. Now, so all of these, I totally appreciate whether, your opinions about if the policy needs to change or not to change. But right now, the implementation team is dealing with the existing policies as is. And that doesn't mean that, we like it or we don't like it. It's just, we are just implementing it as is. But our policy team will continue this discussion in the quarter Q4. And yeah, maybe that will be on an expedited basis for implementation, depending on where the discussions will go. But that's as far as we can say right now, right, from an implementation team perspective.
Well, thank you very much. I do hope that California is able to address this inequitable treatment for California rights with the same degree of urgency that it addressed the concern that Pacific Court had about how its firm rights would be able to be administered in this, because there was a extremely expedited process with a lot of moving parts in terms of the policy to address that, and it is clearly pointed out a disparity in how the California rights are treated relative to non-California firm rights. And so I think that there are several aspects from that policy process both the treatment of CRRs and also the issue of potential inefficient use it or lose it that really need to get addressed in an expedited way.
Absolutely. We're taking this, we note it, and we will discuss it with our policy team, definitely. But as I said, there is nothing in this call that we could actually help in that. What we are trying to show here is how we are implementing these current policies as it stands right now, but we stand, ready for any changes to happen in the future too. And we totally understand the sensitivity and the importance of this topic. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any other hands raised at this moment. So James, I don't know if anyone wants to touch on any other topics before we wrap up. Oh, we just received a hand raised from Steve Keen. Go ahead, Steve.
Hi, this is Steve Keen from Edison. You may have answered this, and I may have missed it, but under like the phase 2 implementation, when everything's done, if you buy a CRR to Malin, do you get the CRR to Malin, or do you have to specify whether it's which G gap it's going to, depending on which BAA you're connecting to? Because
go ahead.
I was going to say, because at Malin, you can go into Malin connects to BPA. It also connects to PacifiCorp, PGE, and potentially other things. So would your CRR be specific to, say, BPA, or would it be generic to the Malin part?
So the generic side of it is the intertie associated with Malin. The Malin scheduling point has a one-to-one relationship to an intertie, the scheduling points have a one-to-one relationship to an intertie. So Malin 5M101 has a specific relationship to the Malin 500 intertie. That intertie will have an association to the ITC. So as part of this translation in phase 1, we are going to ensure that any CRR that is purchased on the Malin scheduling point or a scheduling point associated with the ISO Balancing Authority area is appropriately connected or mapped to the specific intertie where it crosses our border. That way you ensure that the CRR is going to be funded from the congestion associated with that ITC ISL. Where the change from phase 1 to phase 2 is when the CRR system, which is doing the CRR process, does the conversion to be based upon the full network model that's active at that time, it'll have the gap tie definitions. So at that point, we will take the scheduling point locations and map it to the appropriate super gap for those awards that were previously given. And then within that monthly process, you will be giving a list of the specific gap tie combinations that you can nominate for in that monthly process. And so you could be the BPA to Malin, it could be PAC to Malin, it could be Idaho to Malin. There'll be multiple associations. There also will be the generic gap, which is the gap for the north associated to Malin. And then as you go through the monthly process, you would make the determination which of those gap tie combinations you would want to get the CRR for.
Okay. All right. I have to think about the implications of that. Thank you.
You got it.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Callie Wells. Go ahead, Callie.
Yeah, hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. First of all, want to say thank you guys for all the information and the presentation today. I know it's a lot of details and appreciate the transparency. Quick process-oriented question for you guys, if that's okay to ask at this point.
You can ask. I'm not sure I can answer, but please do.
Fair enough, fair enough. So with everything that we've talked through today and all those details and the phasing with the CR model and all that stuff, does any of this require changes to the tariff? Or is this all going to be through BPM changes?
I have to get confirmation from legal. There may be some clarifying language, but that clarifying language is basically going to align with CRB is going to be paying out on the constraints where you receive the revenue. If we have that, if we actually have to provide that clarifying language, it's still under discussion.
Okay, and will there be a market notice coming out if, so that we have an opportunity to engage in that tariff process as well?
Yes, if we do a tariff clarification, we will be sending out the proposed tariff language, and there will be a stakeholder process on that tariff language.
Okay,
or stakeholder
great.
review.
Yeah, stakeholder review. Right, good.
Yep, oh yeah, sorry, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Steve, I see your hand up again. Go ahead, Stephen King.
Hi, Steve Keen from Edison. Yeah, Dolly's question brought one up to me, which is in the market sim, are you going to be testing both phases of this?
We will be testing the first phase in market simulation. We will not necessarily be testing the second phase because I need to have the CRR system changes available, and I do not anticipate that we will have those system changes available till after we go live. That's why we have a phase 2 for July. We may do a separate market sim. I don't know, but that will be up for discussion.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I want to set the expectations. You're not going to see phase 2 as part of the EDAM market simulation.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Chunyu Luo. Go ahead, Chunyu.
Yeah, I guess, James, I think you partly answered my question. I was just going to ask about the CRR system question change. Is there going to be a separate effort on the CRR system side to make the change, or they integrate with this EDAM implementation?
So we have it as a separate BRS and implementation plan associated with it.
I see. And do we know when will we see those BRS for the CRR changes?
We are in the process of writing all the BRQs and reviewing them, not only with the CRR team as well as the market team. So as soon as, I can't give you a specific date, but as soon as we have them completed, we will post them.
Okay, so this is specifically for phase 1 and 2, or just, or consider phase 1's BRQ already done?
Phase 1 is already incorporated in the EDAM BRS, and that should, if it hasn't been posted, it should be posted shortly. Phase 2 is going to be a completely separate.
Okay, sounds good, thank you.
And when you read the BRS, it may say day 1, day 2, it's the same thing.
Oh, okay, so day 1, it's May 1. Day 2, it's June 1.
Yeah, day 1 means phase 1, day 2 means phase 2.
Okay. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Next in the queue, we have Dan Williams from the Energy Authority.
Hey, thanks. So just a quick process question as well. On the meeting that you mentioned we'll have on the more complicated scenario of a wheel through an EDAM BA on COI rights, is that something you expect to have in the coming weeks, or is it waiting for an external driver like FERC order or something like that in order to get to the point of being ready to have that discussion?
It's not waiting on a FERC order. It is more of we have to determine the scope and then determine the timing and the presentation material, as well as if there's any other items. We're going to have a multiple set of workshops like this to make sure everybody is aware going to EDIM what they can expect to participate. We just haven't determined the exact date of the COI discussion.
Okay. I think you could probably tell who's interested in that discussion, and I'll just say open door, open email inbox if you'd like to test if we're covering all scenarios that are at least in the market participants' mind that we'd like to see covered.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
And James, did you have any final thoughts before we wrap up for the day? I'm not seeing any other questions this time.
I do not. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have a few next steps before we wrap up for the day. For next steps, please continue to participate in EDAM trainings and workshops as they are scheduled. We have an upcoming one on Tuesday for day-ahead market enhancements, configurable parameters, implementation working group. And then meeting materials are available on the initiatives page, and the video recording will be posted soon. If you have any additional questions that come up, you can always reach out to us at ISO stakeholderaffairs@CAISO.com. Here's some trainings to note that took place this week. The recording for the training on Monday was posted today, and Wednesday's recording will be posted soon. Next, I have a few announcements before we wrap up. Here you can see important publications, a news release, and an outages link. And lastly, for insights into the ISO grid and market operations, please be on the lookout for our Energy Matters blog, or you can always subscribe. Here you can see our latest blog posts regarding new EDAM training sessions that will provide valuable insights for market participants. So with that, we'd like to thank you so much for joining today's extended day-ahead market implementation discussion. As a reminder, the meeting was recorded for informational and convenience purposes only, and all meeting materials are available online. The video file recording will be posted soon as well. We thank you very much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
This event has concluded. Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.